When I woke up, I was sitting on a throne made of packed earth. More than 100 green-skinned goblins scurried through the damp cavern. None of them stood even 3 feet tall, and they wore nothing but animal hides and leaves. Whenever one glanced toward the throne, fear appeared in its eyes because I was the chief of this tribe. Being transported to another world was not frightening. Being transported into the body of a goblin was. I was barely over 3 feet tall now, with green skin and nothing remotely human about my face. The upside was that I did not have to work and could enjoy the tribe's best food. The downside was that this feeble tribe could be wiped out at any moment. Magic and gods existed in this world. Humans, elves, beast folk, dwarves, and dragons occupied the surface, while weak monsters such as goblins had been driven underground. My tribe lived on the very edge of the underworld, with cave spiders on one side and gnolls on the other. Ordinary goblins could not even defeat properly equipped humans, and classed adventurers could exterminate an entire tribe with ease. Looking at the rabble before me, I could see no future at all. Just as I was wondering how I could survive, a voice suddenly sounded inside my head. The prolific bloodline system has been activated. Dark Goblin racial template acquired. Goblin talent scroll acquired chieftain tier. The rules were simple. If I formed a reproductive bond and fathered children, I would receive rewards. The more descendants I had and the greater their potential, the richer those rewards would be. I claimed the racial template at once. Power swept through my body, and dark gold markings surfaced across my green skin. I looked more vicious, but my body did not immediately grow stronger. What truly changed was the potential of my race. Dark goblins were not bound by the usual barriers between species and could reproduce with other races. Their offspring would inherit their mother's talents and had a small chance of undergoing a beneficial mutation. Pregnancy lasted only 1 or 2 weeks, and the children reached adulthood in 2 months. Divine power had also shattered my personal growth limit, giving me the potential to evolve without end. The final ability was called Darkfall. Anyone who formed a reproductive bond with me would receive a divine imprint on the soul. Under its long-term influence, that person might gradually become dependent on me. The power was obviously dangerous, but it was also my only chance to grow quickly in the underworld. The system ended with a single assessment. You are the only dark goblin in this world. It took me several days to understand the resources at my disposal. The tribe had no writing and no metalworking. We survived by gathering fungi and attacking weaker creatures, and when anyone was injured, they could do nothing but endure it. The so-called throne was merely a mound of dirt the previous chief had raised to distinguish his status. Goblins could not understand complex plans, but they understood food, fear, and simple gestures. To turn them into a real army, I first needed a reliable chain of command. Weapons and training would come afterward. The system's accelerated reproduction was not an unconditional miracle, either. The stronger the mother, the more nutrition she required. Even though the children matured quickly, they still had to pass through infancy. If our food supply could not keep up, explosive population growth would only make the tribe collapse faster. The Darkfall imprint did not guarantee absolute loyalty, either. It influenced a person's inclinations over time, but the strong could still resist. In other words, the system had given me the potential to develop not a ready-made empire. I kept those limits firmly in mind. The nearby gnolls controlled miners. The cave spiders dominated the hunting grounds, and classed fighters could emerge from the surface entrance at any time. Whichever side first noticed something unusual about my tribe might destroy it before I had time to grow. I quickly confirmed that this world had none of the laws, cities, or rescue services I had known in my previous life. My clansmen cared only about strength. Food went to whoever seized it, and the injured could be abandoned at any moment. Rather than treating my reincarnation as an accident, I chose to establish 3 rules. First, obey orders, share food, and never fight among ourselves. Absolute dominion would ensure the rules were enforced, while the system's rewards meant I had to keep the clan alive long enough to turn each birth into a lasting advantage. I also set a line for myself whenever I used the system's abilities. I had to consider the long-term risk they posed to my territory. Power could force obedience in the moment, but food, rules, and predictable safety would determine whether a band of monsters still stood beside me when the next disaster came. From that moment on, survival was no longer my problem alone. It was a long-term undertaking the entire newborn clan would have to complete together. As I watched those fragile clansmen in the cavern, I felt for the first time that this tribe might still be saved. I crushed the chieftain tier talent scroll. Light merged into my body, and a new ability appeared. Absolute Dominion Chieftain Tier talent. Within your territory, you may command all goblins below Chieftain Tier. Whenever I gave an order, every goblin in the tribe would carry it out without hesitation. For a horde of cowardly, chaotic low-level monsters with almost no discipline, this ability mattered far more than a simple increase in strength. For the first time, it gave me true control of an army. But reproduction remained the system's core. I could not accomplish that alone, and I had no intention of choosing a partner from my own kind. If I wanted the first rewards, I would have to find members of another race. Before I could think of a way, the cavern suddenly shook, and an explosion thundered from deep inside the tunnel. A goblin stumbled toward me and used gestures to report that 4 human-classed adventurers were approaching the tribe. Any adventurer capable of entering the underworld was no ordinary person. Even a complete party of newly classed adventurers could slaughter more than 100 goblins. And the explosion meant there was a mage among them. Meeting them head-on would be suicide. I could only use the terrain. A fork lay several hundred yards beyond the tribe. One path led to the surface, another to a knoll camp, and the last to our cavern. I sent 10 goblins out as bait, ordering them to reveal themselves deliberately before the adventurers and then flee toward the knolls. Meanwhile, I led the rest of my followers into dark fissures along both sides of the tunnel. Most of the underworld had no light. Goblins could see in the dark, while humans had to rely on torches or illumination spells. It was the only advantage I could exploit. Before long, a fireball erupted inside the tunnel. In its light, I saw our enemies clearly: a shield bearer in silver armor, a female mage carrying a staff, a warrior with a greatsword, and an unarmed martial artist. All 4 were novices who had only recently gained their classes. They were still far stronger than ordinary goblins, but at least they were not powerful enough to make me despair. I watched them chase down the bait and did not strike at once. When absolute dominion activated, the goblins that had been fighting over food all fell silent at the same time. I ordered 10 to form 2 rows and another 10 to carry stones. For the first time, they moved like disciplined soldiers. This talent only worked within my territory and might not affect members of my race at or above chieftain tier. But it was more than enough to transform the tribe before me. When the scout reported the humans, I first counted every member capable of fighting. Fewer than 80 could actually wield a weapon, and those so-called weapons were mostly rocks, bone clubs, and rusty daggers. Even if I forced the women and children into battle, we still could not stop 4-classed adventurers. I did not prepare just one false route. After the bait departed, another team dug a pit in the narrow tunnel leading to the tribe, then concealed it with branches and wet soil. A third group gathered numbing vine and smeared its sap on captured knives. Finally, I sent several of the smallest goblins through cracks in the rock to circle behind the planned battlefield. Whether the plan succeeded would depend on the adventurers maintaining a tight formation in the dark. Whenever the fireball lit the tunnel, I saw that the female mage had to stop and chant before every spell, while the shield bearer always remained in front. That order told me exactly what to do: separate the shield bearer from the party, seize the staff, and let our numbers overwhelm the 2 remaining melee fighters. When visual sharing first sent me an image of the humans, I ordered the scout that had spotted them not to approach. Their boots were clean and their weapons still shone with maintenance oil, proving they had only just entered the underworld. Their formation was loose, however, which showed their inexperience. I told the hidden sentries to record only their numbers, classes, and escape routes, then move the old and weak into deeper caverns. To the adventurers, goblins were nothing more than rewards. But to a clan that had only just established rules, this encounter would decide whether we could defend our only home. Their strength was never the only problem. The real question was whether they would recognize the traps along this path. "Nate, slow down, I'm almost out of mana." The female mage's voice came from farther up the tunnel. She had cast fireballs the whole way, and her face had visibly paled. Nate, the greatsword warrior, still did not take the goblins seriously and wanted to catch the last few pieces of bait. The shield bearer suddenly stopped him and raised his torch to examine the tracks on the ground. My bait had come from the direction of the tribe, but had deliberately fled toward the knoll camp. From that, the shield bearer decided their escape route must be a trap and chose the tunnel leading to my tribe instead. He believed he had seen through a goblin scheme, but he had led his party straight onto the battlefield I had actually prepared. As their footsteps drew closer, I abandoned the thought of retreat. The tribe lay behind the tunnel, hemmed in by solid rock on every side. If I lost these goblins, I would not survive long on my own. The enemy consisted of a mage nearly out of mana and 3 melee fighters. If I broke their formation first, I still had a chance. When all 4 entered the narrowest section, the shield bearer in front stepped into empty space and fell into a deep pit, shield and all. His heavy armor wedged his body in place, preventing him from climbing out. The instant Nate turned to rescue him, I ordered the goblins to charge from the front. Another group circled behind the party, tore the female mage's staff away, and pinned her to the ground. The martial artist tried to protect the mage while Nate swung his greatsword in a deadly arc. Ordinary goblins fell one after another. But under absolute dominion, not one of them retreated. More than a dozen seized Nate's arms and legs at once, finally slowing his movements. I slipped closer through the darkness, gripped my dagger coated in numbing vine poison, and thrust it through a gap in his armor. The poison was not lethal, but it could paralyze a gnoll's entire body. Nate tried to struggle, only for the strength to drain rapidly from his limbs. He dropped to his knees. The mage had been subdued, the shield bearer was trapped in the pit, and the strongest warrior had been poisoned. Only the martial artist was still resisting, and an endless tide of goblins already surrounded him. I sacrificed dozens of followers, but at last, I had completely dismantled the party's advantages. When the shield bearer identified the genuine tracks, I almost thought the plan had failed. He correctly judged that the bait's route was suspicious, never realizing the tracks were a second layer of information I had deliberately left behind. His attempt to outsmart us made him choose the more dangerous path, though it also put the entire party on alert. That was why the first goblins did not attack directly. Instead, they threw rocks to make noise on both sides. The adventurers' torches and attention turned away, allowing the shield bearer in front to step into the pit. I had placed no spikes at the bottom. Once a heavily armored fighter became wedged there, he was effectively out of the battle. I had no need to risk killing him on the spot. The staff-seizing team lost 2 members before it managed to pin Catherine down. When the martial artist turned to help her, Nate's left side became exposed, and more than a dozen goblins swarmed him at once. Every time one fell, another took its place. Absolute dominion let them ignore their fear, but it did not spare them from injury. The ground was soon covered in the bodies of my clansmen. Even after the numbing vine poison entered his wound, Nate managed to swing his sword twice more. Only when his knee struck the ground did I know the dose was enough. Seeing his party collapse, the martial artist tried to break out, but the goblins I had stationed at the exit drove him back. The battle was finally decided, but it had been no easy victory. I had traded almost half the tribe's adults to leave for classed adventurers unable to fight. The trap relied on no complex machinery. It simply exploited the human instinct to chase the weak. Several ordinary goblins exposed themselves on purpose, then retreated along a route we had cleared in advance. When their pursuers entered the narrow passage, falling rocks sealed the rear while poisonous smoke and thrown spears came from both sides. No single part was lethal, but together they prevented a complete party from supporting one another. For the first time, I understood that courage was not the true weapon of the weak. Their weapon was forcing the enemy to make the wrong decision at the wrong moment, again and again. From that point on, numbers were no longer their advantage. They were mine. The martial artist bled out under the assault, and the poisoned Nate was finished off as well. The shield bearer in the pit wore full heavy armor that our ordinary weapons could barely penetrate. So I simply ordered the goblins to fill in the pit rather than waste more fighters. Of the 4 adventurers, only the female mage remained alive. Her staff was gone, her hands pinned against the ground, and nothing but fear remained in her eyes. I stepped out of the darkness and asked whether she wanted to live. She did not answer, but she stopped struggling. For me, that was enough. I restrained her with chains and brought her back to the tribe. Her name was Catherine. Born into a human noble family, she was a novice fire mage who had only recently completed her class advancement. She clearly regarded her surrender as temporary and was still waiting for her family to find this place. But I did not shatter that hope. This was not a relationship between equals. She was a prisoner taken after a failed invasion, and I needed the power the system could provide. I did not disguise the nature of my choice. I housed her alone in the chief's cavern, stationed more than a dozen goblins outside, and ordered the entire tribe to gather food and clean water. Dark goblins had an extremely short reproductive cycle, but the mother still required a great deal of nutrition. 2 weeks later, Catherine gave birth to 5 children, 4 common tier offspring and 1 elite tier offspring. Reward all attributes plus 5 fire element mana plus 10, first offspring born. Bonus reward 1 talent scroll. Power flooded my entire body in an instant. I remained barely over 3 feet tall, but my physique changed fundamentally. A one-handed greatsword that had once taken 3 to 5 goblins to lift now rose in a single hand. In raw physical ability, I was already approaching a genuine classed fighter. More importantly, I possessed mana for the first time. Scorching fire elements gathered in my palm, but they only formed an unstable flame. Possessing mana did not mean I knew how to cast spells. A mage had to use mana to construct a spell model, then stabilize its release through a staff. I looked at the staff Catherine had left on the battlefield, then toward the chief's cavern. Taking stock after the battle was far more brutal than celebrating victory. Dozens of goblins were dead, many more were wounded, and the already weak tribe had nearly lost its ability to hunt. The adventurer's armor, weapons, staff, and food were our only compensation. I ordered everyone still capable of moving to seal the tunnel, bury the bodies, and save the numbing vine for future defenses. Catherine had suffered no mortal injuries, but with her mana exhausted, she could not resist. I did not place her with any other prisoners because the system template explicitly required reproductive partners to remain alive. She received clean clothes, her own drinking water, and food, but chains and guards completely restricted her. The treatment was not kindness. It was meant to preserve her health and that of the children. When the 5 children were born, Fur looked more human than goblin, retaining only the shape of a goblin's nose and ears. The elite infant had red skin and fiery markings across his body. I could feel heat radiating from him whenever I drew near. The ordinary goblins gathered outside the entrance, but did not dare approach. Instinct told them these infants were different from their kind. After the reward entered my body, I tested how much I could carry, then my speed and endurance. I could do more than simply raise the one-handed greatsword. Now I could swing it repeatedly. My fire element mana, meanwhile, was like a shapeless current of heat that dispersed from my palm the moment my concentration slipped. To turn that power into a true weapon, I still needed the magical knowledge Catherine possessed. The post-battle inventory mattered more than any celebration. We sorted every usable potion, metal weapon, article of clothing, and source of fire. The wounded received treatment according to their chances of survival, and the entrance was disguised again. Catherine remained under separate guard and had no contact with ordinary followers. A prisoner who spoke the human language, understood magic, and possessed information about the surface could bring disaster more easily than any weapon. I did not need her immediate approval. I needed her to understand that survival required knowledge and cooperation in exchange. A trained fire mage was right here. If I could make her teach me the most basic spells, I could supply the ranged power the tribe lacked most. First, I used the talent scroll the system had rewarded me. Chieftain tier talent acquired visual sharing. Within your territory, you may share the vision of your blood descendants, racial servants, and bound followers. This ability paired perfectly with absolute dominion. From now on, even if I remained in the tribe, I could observe enemies through a goblin's eyes and issue orders from afar. Once I had enough followers, there would be no true blind spot anywhere in my territory. After entering the chief's cavern, I studied the 5 children carefully for the first time. Fur looked more human, with only a few goblin traits. The 5th was larger, with red skin and flame-like markings across his body. He was the elite tier offspring, born with an affinity for the fire element. He would reach at least the level of a novice spellcaster once he matured. The system had not exaggerated. Offspring truly inherited their mother's talents and might mutate even further. Catherine leaned against the cavern wall with empty eyes. In a low voice, she told me to kill her, yet showed obvious resistance whenever I approached. The divine imprint had not instantly changed her will. She still hated me, and she was still waiting for a chance to escape. I needed her to remain alive, and I needed her magical knowledge even more. I therefore promised her the best food in the tribe, clean water, and a comparatively safe place to live. I did not return her staff or remove her guards. In this underworld, the defeated had no right to demand fairness from the victor. If her adventuring party had won, every member of my tribe and I would already be dead. That logic could not make Catherine accept what had happened, but it was enough to suppress what little hesitation remained in me. She was both my prisoner and the key to keeping the system running. I would not let her die, and I certainly would not let her leave easily. Catherine closed her eyes and began praying to the god she worshipped. She asked her deity to see this cavern and rescue her from me. I stood in the shadows and did not interrupt. The first time I activated visual sharing, dozens of images reached me at once, nearly drowning my mind in chaotic information. Gradually, I learned to focus on a single target and switch only when needed. The shared target had to belong to my territory, bloodline, or retinue, and the farther it traveled beyond my domain, the more interference disrupted the images. Even so, the ability was enough to build a reconnaissance network without exposing me personally. When Catherine saw the 5 children, she did not approach them willingly, yet whenever she heard them cry, she still checked whether they were thirsty or hurt. I could only infer from those actions that she had not completely rejected them. I could not know her thoughts. The dependence the system had described did not appear immediately, either. At the very least, her eyes remained full of vigilance whenever she looked at me. I cleaned the adventurer's robes and personal belongings before giving them to her, then placed the 5 infants in a small, adjoining cavern. My chieftain tier talent ensured the children would not defy me, but it could not replace an education. If I let ordinary goblins raise them, they would grow up repeating the primitive tribe-s habits. Only after Catherine finished praying did I offer in exchange she would teach me the fundamentals of magic, and I would provide medicine and food while allowing her to care for the children herself. She refused at first, until I pointed out that without knowledgeable guidance, the flame-marked infant might injure the others as he grew. That practical concern finally made her speak. The system made reproduction a condition for rewards, but it did not bear the consequences for me. Catherine's resistance, fear, and hatred were all real. I preserved the truth of this coercive relationship without dressing it up in graphic detail or calling it affection. She received food, medical care, and private shelter, but she had still lost her freedom. To me, this was not a conquest worth praising. It was a cruel shortcut I had chosen for the clan in an extreme world, and its cost would remain in our relationship. To prevent the guards from treating a prisoner as something they could harm at will, I decreed that no one could enter the stone chamber without orders and that meals and inspections required 2 guards. The restriction protected Catherine, but it also protected the clan from losing its most important source of human intelligence to a single act of private revenge. The underworld belonged to chaos and monsters, and the power of the gods of order had difficulty reaching it. I did not know whether the rescue she awaited would ever come. Until then, I had to learn Fireball from her. At last, Catherine asked what it would take for me to let her go. I needed to give her a reason to keep living. So I told her that the adventuring party's invasion had cost me nearly half my clansmen. If she helped me replace that lost population, I would restore her freedom. Light returned to her lifeless eyes. If it meant leaving this place, she was willing to cooperate in order to survive, and she was willing to teach me the fundamentals of magic. I did not tell her that the exact number of lives lost and whether I honored my promise at all would ultimately be mine to decide. First and foremost, the agreement was a means of controlling a prisoner. Only after that might it become a genuine bargain. Catherine divided fire magic into 4 levels: cantrips, lower, middle, and upper. The higher the level, the more complicated the spell model. Fireball was a relatively simple lower spell, yet it still required a stable circulation of mana. Under her guidance, I tried using Catherine's staff to stabilize the model. Fire elements gathered along a predetermined path, finally forming a complete fireball above my palm. Unlike the uncontrolled flame I had produced without a staff, this power could finally be hurled at an enemy. I also understood the true reason we had won the previous battle. Catherine was only a novice. Once panic disrupted her focus and she lost her staff, she could barely cast another spell. An experienced senior mage would have remained combat-capable even without a focus. I could not expect the same good fortune forever. As soon as the tribe expanded, it would compete with the surrounding monsters for food, minerals, and territory. War was inevitable. I had to build a stronger force before it arrived, and the system offered the fastest path. A human mother normally bore 3 to 5 children at a time. Beast folk, with their stronger bodies, might bear more than 10. Legendary bloodlines such as dragons were immensely powerful but far less fertile, producing no more than 3 in a single birth. There was an obvious trade-off between quantity and bloodline quality. Catherine alone could give me no more than about 10 children a month. That was nowhere near enough. I needed more dependable reproductive partners, along with food, weapons, and territory large enough to house the new clansmen. The system had given me a route to power, but it had not solved the problem of resources. Looking around the filthy, chaotic cavern, I found myself a noble-sounding justification. Catherine had me practice sensing fire elements before attempting another fireball. Mana had to pass through fixed nodes, and the slightest deviation would make the model collapse. The staff already contained a recorded spell structure, reducing the number of construction steps, but it could not control the energy for the caster. On my first attempt, the fireball exploded in my palm. Fortunately, the Dark Goblin template had improved my recovery. On the second, my mana dispersed because I had connected the nodes in the wrong order. Only after dozens of repetitions could I barely maintain the complete model. Catherine told me to aim at a stone wall 60 feet away. The fireball veered several times in flight, but it still blasted a visible crater into the rock. The exercise also exposed my lack of mana. The 10 points of fire element mana I currently possessed could support only 1 complete fireball. after which I had to wait for it to recover. If I wasted that spell at the start of a battle, I would immediately lose all ranged capability. I replanned the tribe-S development, expand food gathering first, seize mineral resources second, and only then increase the population. A partner-S bloodline affected the number, quality, and gestation period of the children, so I could not pursue quantity alone. Catherine produced 3 to 5 per birth, with the advantage that they reliably inherited human intelligence and magical potential. A stronger race might bring greater rewards, but it would also consume more time and resources. I did not merely need more children. I needed a clan capable of feeding, training, and equipping them. After the first children were born, I did not look only at the system's numbers. The 4 common individuals required food and care. The elite grew faster, but he could still die in infancy. I converted the safest cavern into a nursery, assigned physically weak followers to caregiving, and placed every adult capable of fighting on patrol. The rewards made me stronger as an individual. Whether the children reached adulthood and learned to fight together would determine whether the tribe truly became stronger. The nursery was divided according to body temperature and magical reactions. Common infants received care together, while the elite infant was monitored separately. When food ran short, we first guaranteed the minimum needs of every child, then gave high-energy materials to those with the stronger bloodlines. It was hardly romantic, but it turned our limited resources into the greatest possible number of adult fighters. Everything I did was for the tribe. The children would mature within 2 months. At that rate, our current cavern would soon be too small for the new clansmen. I decided to redevelop the territory, beginning with shelter, storage, and defense. We could obtain timber from the forest near the surface, but the only source of iron ore was a neighboring kobold camp. Hundreds of miners and more than a dozen gnoll overseers lived there, extracting ore for a gnoll tribe. The goblins had no chance in a frontal assault, so I sent 3 teams to infiltrate the camp and activated visual sharing. 30 pairs of eyes sent images from different positions, allowing me to survey the entire mine while seated on my throne. The kobolds constantly pushed mine carts into the central warehouse while the gnolls patrolled with whips. A single gnoll was far stronger than an ordinary goblin. If they remained together, my limited force would be torn apart in moments, so I had no intention of fighting them head-on. I ordered 1 goblin team to leave a piece of roasted meat in an isolated place. The nearest gnoll overseer caught the scent and immediately wandered away from its companions. It noticed the smell of goblins as it drew near, but by then, it was too late to raise the alarm. 10 goblins lunged out of the darkness at once and pinned its limbs. Through visual sharing, I guided the sword-bearer's movements, driving the dagger through the gnoll's eye socket and ending the fight quickly. The greatest weakness of low-level monsters was not limited strength, but their inability to control their instincts. Food, anger, and territorial aggression could all lure them away from their group. I only had to repeat the provocation to break more than a dozen overseers into isolated targets. But the first corpse left behind the smell of blood. Gnolls had sharp noses, and the others nearby would soon investigate. Through the 30 scouts' eyes, I mapped the mine's rough layout. The warehouse stood in the center. The gnoll overseers patrolled in several groups, while the kobold miners remained in the best-lit area. If I caused an open disturbance, hundreds of kobolds might be driven ahead of the overseers and forced to charge us first. I chose to act during a shift change. The first piece of roasted meat was placed in a side tunnel far from the miners, where we had prepared a vine net and piles of stone. The goblins did not strike as soon as the gnoll approached. They waited until it lowered its head to identify the scent. The eye socket was its weakest point, so the captured dagger went in there rather than trying to cut through thick fur and muscle. The corpse had to be dragged away immediately, though we could not completely remove the blood from the ground. I placed a second piece of bait farther away, making the next overseer believe its companion had chased an intruder. Every success reduced the gnoll's numbers, but it also increased the chance of the goblins being exposed. The kobolds continued working in the mine, daring only to glance furtively toward the darkness. Their overseers whipped them, but they had no organization capable of open resistance. I began to suspect that if I eliminated every gnoll, the kobolds might not fight for their old masters. Ownership of a mine was determined not only by who killed the most, but by who could keep its miners alive and working. The kobold camp stood near the ore vein and had a larger population than the goblin tribe, yet a stronger power had exploited it for years. They knew how to dig, identify ore, and reinforce tunnels, filling precisely the gaps in a clan that knew only how to hunt. I did not kill their leader the moment I arrived. Instead, I displayed my strength and promised to preserve their internal way of life. Absolute dominion could prevent betrayal, but it could not create technical knowledge from nothing. Followers willing to work had greater long-term value than slaves ruled by fear alone. The first step had succeeded. Now we had to keep reducing their numbers before they regrouped. If even one survivor escaped to the Null tribe, I would not be seizing a mine, it would be starting a war before I was ready. I ordered every infiltrator to smear pungent herb sap over its body, using the reek to confuse the Null's sense of smell. When several overseers followed the scent of blood, a vine net dropped from overhead. The goblins stabbed through its openings. We suffered several casualties, but killed several more targets. The same tactic worked again and again until I had eliminated 7 gnolls. At last, the remaining overseers sensed that something was wrong. They gathered in the center of the mine and refused to move alone. Remote command could no longer finish the battle. I took the captured greatsword and hurried to the camp myself. I had only so many goblins. If I continued trading their lives for kills, I would have no force left to hold the mine after taking it. When the 7 gnolls saw that the invaders were goblins, they charged together in fury. I refused to get bogged down among them. Using my enhanced strength, I slipped past their claws and took the leader's head with a single stroke. The others froze for an instant, giving me time to construct the spell model I had just learned. The fireball exploded in their midst, gravely wounding 3 gnolls and nearly exhausting all my mana. Terrified by their leader's death and my magic, the surviving enemies turned and fled into the tunnel. I hurled the greatsword through one, while the other 2 plunged into pits the goblins had prepared in advance. When the battle ended, not one of the overseers had escaped. The kobolds in the mine gathered around but did not dare come close. They stood about 5 feet tall, had canine heads, and excelled at mining rather than combat. After witnessing the gnolls' deaths, most of them chose to hide. Finally, an elderly kobold stepped out of the crowd. He knelt before me, introduced himself as an elder of the Ironstone clan, and asked me to accept the loyalty of his entire people. I did not immediately believe that loyalty, but I truly did need miners. After the 7 remaining gnolls assembled, I first had the goblins throw stones and torches from both sides to disrupt their charge. When their leader leaped over the trap and reached me, the greatsword's weight proved its worth for the first time. I used my smaller stature to avoid its claws and cut upward into a vital point. The fireball did not kill 3 enemies outright. It only burned and temporarily blinded them. The goblins took advantage by restricting their movement with spears and suffered further casualties before finishing the kills. The last 2 fugitives did not fall into newly dug pits, either. They plunged into abandoned kobold mine shafts that my followers had covered with thin boards ahead of time. After the battle, I ordered no massacre of the kobolds and did not seize their food. The elder only emerged after confirming that fact. In the common tongue of the underworld, he said the Ironstone clan would continue mining and surrender its output in exchange for an end to arbitrary killings. I accepted their oath with 2 additional conditions: no, or could be concealed, and any unusual object they discovered had to be reported. In exchange, the Caesar clan would not whip the miners and would defend them against outside monsters. Whether the kobolds were sincere did not matter. What mattered was whether the rules could be enforced. When the elder led every miner to their knees, I gained followers from a race other than goblins for the first time. The Caesar clan had not yet been formally named, but its structure was already beginning to take shape. The Ironstone clan surrendered more than a camp. They gave me maps of the mine, records of cave-ins, and the migration routes of nearby monsters. I reassigned work by skill. Veteran miners led crews, younger kobolds transported ore, and those unable to enter the mine cultivated fungi. The clan distributed food centrally. Hiding or no longer brought the death penalty instead. The offender lost a portion of the ration and received additional work. Some tested the rules during the first few days, but consistent rewards and punishments as unyielding as iron soon transformed the camp from a place of fear into a productive outpost. As long as the Ironstone clan continued extracting ore, I could offer them a new protector for the time being. Who truly held their loyalty would ultimately depend on whether I could keep the more powerful Gnoll tribe at bay. In the underworld, weak peoples commonly attach themselves to the strong. Pledging loyalty to goblins, however, was almost unheard of. I accepted the Ironstone clan's oath while fully aware that it was only a verbal promise. The kobold elder wanted to exchange obedience for survival. If the gnolls retook the mine, he would probably bow to them again. I did not need false devotion. I needed them to keep producing ore. As long as my strength was sufficient, betrayal would never become more than a thought. The elder led me to the mine's warehouse. Rusty chains sealed its wooden doors, I cut them apart with one swing and found at least several tons of iron ore piled inside. I now had the raw material for weapons, armor, and territorial defenses. All I lacked were craftsmen capable of turning it into finished goods. Kobolds knew how to smelt metal, but they could only make crude ironware. True blacksmiths would have to be found on the surface. Human villages, however, often had churches and high-level class fighters behind them. I could not recklessly expose the tribe yet. I also asked how often the gnolls came to collect the ore. The elder said a transport convoy arrived every 6 mana tides. The underworld measured a tide as 30-day cycles, which translated to 6 months. More than 2 months had passed since the last convoy, leaving me roughly 3.5 months to prepare. It was not much time, but it would be enough for the first offspring to mature and for me to establish basic defenses. While inspecting the warehouse, I found a pile of ancient objects dug out of the ore vein. Most crumbled at a touch. Only one yellowed scroll of animal hide remained intact. Complicated shapes covered the scroll, resembling some kind of magic circle. The kobolds did not know its purpose and had thrown it in with the refuse. I did not activate it blindly. I brought it back to the tribe instead. The ordinary iron ore in the warehouse could supply hundreds of basic pieces of equipment, but the kobolds had no precision tools. They placed ore in crude clay furnaces, judged the temperature by experience, and often produced metal full of impurities. I had them begin with iron nails, door hinges, and simple spearheads, leaving real weapons until I could find proper craftsmen. I added the manhwaedit calendar to our territorial records as well. Each day cycle was roughly equal to one surface day, with 30-day cycles making one tide. Monsters grew more violent during the tides, especially spiders and gnolls. 3.5 months remained before the convoy arrived, but that did not mean no inspectors would come in the meantime. Most of the old objects in the warehouse had come from deep within the vein. They included shattered bone fragments, rotten wooden tools, and scraps of metal that had lost all mana, suggesting another civilization might once have occupied this place. The hide scroll's freedom from decay was proof that some power protected its material or writing. I did not understand magic circles, but I could still see lines surrounding a central space in what appeared to be a sacrificial structure. Pouring mana into it blindly might summon something I could not control. I sealed the scroll inside an iron box and kept the demi-human infants and ordinary goblins away from the research area. When Catherine took the scroll, her numb expression became serious for the first time. She recognized several ancient demonic symbols and warned me that the return offered by a sacrificial ritual was never truly free. The patterns did not belong to any elemental magic Catherine knew. Before using it, there was no way to tell whether it would summon an ally, a monster, or a catastrophe. I first emptied the surrounding caves, moved the important infants elsewhere, and drew an isolation circle on the floor. Every ranged follower guarded an exit, while I alone stood beside the scroll. The true danger of an unknown object was not that its effect might be powerful, but that a mistake usually permitted no second attempt. Yet if I stopped advancing, stronger enemies would devour us just as surely. In the end, I chose to open it. Catherine was only a novice mage, but she had at least received a systematic magical education. If she could identify the pattern, I might gain something more valuable than the entire warehouse of iron ore. After studying the scroll, Catherine confirmed that it described a demonic sacrificial ritual. She had received a Noble S education from childhood, and her teacher was a senior mage from the imperial capital, so she could recognize the features of ancient demonic writing. She still could not determine what kind of demon the ritual would summon. She said demons had once waged war against the gods in ancient times, until the two sides finally established a covenant. Demons could not enter the prime material plane on their own, but they could answer a mortal-less summons. If a sacrificer offered flesh or souls, the summoned demon would usually provide some form of reward according to the contract. That meant the ritual was dangerous, but not necessarily without benefit. I ordered my followers to gather the bodies of the adventurers, gnolls, and goblins who had died recently, rather than let the flesh rot. I could exchange it for a chance to contact a higher power. I inscribed the magic circle according to the scroll, but could not read the complete invocation, so I used my own words to invite a being of the abyss to feast on the offering. At first, nothing happened. Just as I was about to give up, the mound of corpses vanished in an instant, and a column of violet light rose from the circle. A pale hand passed through the ground. Then a woman with long horns and unmistakably demonic features on her back stepped out. Everything about her clothing and aura radiated temptation. After surveying the chamber, her gaze finally settled on me. In that instant, I was nearly certain she had never expected her summoner to be a goblin. She announced that she would repay the offering with a single boon, speaking as though granting alms to a lowly servant. At the same time, an invisible mental force attempted to invade my consciousness. The system responded immediately. You are being charmed by Evelyn Hiddled, a high succubus. Dark divine power has taken effect. Charm negated. At last, I knew what I had summoned. Catherine marked every symbol she could read. The outer ring anchored space. The second layer transmitted the offering, and the central area constructed a temporary body for the summoned entity. The circle itself did not specify a target. The quality of the sacrifice determined who answered. Inferior flesh might draw only a mindless imp, or its unusual aura might attract the interest of a higher being. I had the kobolds establish the ritual site in an empty cavern far from the living quarters and dig 3 escape tunnels. My flame-blooded offspring hid near the entrances, ready to burn the circle if a creature incapable of communication appeared. Catherine remained much farther away and offered her judgment through visual sharing. She would not personally approach a demonic ritual. When the circle consumed the bodies, the ground briefly became like the surface of water. After Evelyn crossed the spatial boundary, the passage behind her did not close completely, proving she remained connected to the abyss. She first counted the offerings, then studied the dark gold markings on my body, and only afterward cast her charm. Her expression visibly changed the instant the system neutralized her mental power. High succubi were accustomed to making their targets surrender everything willingly, but they lacked direct combat abilities when facing someone immune. That gap in her understanding was my chance to keep her here. After the circle activated, the smell of sulfur arrived before the figure did. Evelyn did not attack at once. She tested my desires through her voice and posture, showing that she was accustomed to making prey lower its own defenses. When the charm touched my consciousness, dark divine power washed it away like cold water. I did not reveal my immunity. I let her approach the edge of the circle, then sealed the route back to the abyss. Against a demon skilled at manipulating judgment, the surest victory was to keep her from realizing she had already lost. The circle retained demonic coordinates even after going dark. I had my flame-blooded offspring burn away its outer ring, then covered the runes with broken stone. If the abyss could trace the route in reverse, one high succubus might be only the first visitor. Any passage that brought power also required a method of closing it. A high succubus from the abyss and her greatest strength had no effect on me. Succubi specialized in controlling desire and draining life force. Once an ordinary person lost all reason, the victim's vitality would soon be exhausted. A high succubus possessed enough mental power to influence even classed fighters. Evelyn was clearly accustomed to solving every problem through charm. When she realized I remained lucid, cracks appeared in her composure for the first time. I gave her no chance to try again and swung my greatsword immediately. Demons possessed immense vitality and could recover from ordinary wounds, so I first destroyed her ability to move, then secured her with chains. She furiously declared her true name and ordered me to release her, but she could not break the restraints forged from black iron ore. The summoning ritual had allowed her into the prime material plane, but it also bound her to an ancient contract. Until the ritual connection ended, she could not freely project the full power of the abyss here. Once deprived of her charm, she was not even as capable in close combat as a classed warrior. That was why I had dared to attack. Succubi and dark goblins shared similar racial traits. When the former reproduced with other races, the offspring were normally still succubi. The latter produced descendants that adapted along the goblin bloodline. I wanted to know which power the system would consider dominant when the two collided. I confined Evelyn in the newly excavated second cavern and assigned my offspring to guard her in shifts. She tested me constantly with promises, threats, and charm, but every attempted mental intrusion produced another notice of failure from the system. There was no fairness in this relationship, either. I regarded her as a dangerous prisoner from the abyss and as an irreplaceable bloodline experiment. Evelyn, meanwhile, finally understood that she had not come here to enjoy the sacrifice. The hunter had become the one under control, to prevent her from escaping to the abyss. I preserved the summoning circle while placing both flame and black iron barriers outside the cavern. Evelyn's severed limbs quickly began to regenerate, proving ordinary injuries could restrain her only temporarily. I fixed her chains to black iron stakes and assigned my flame-blooded offspring to stand watch in shifts. Succubi excelled at turning guards against one another with words, so no ordinary follower was allowed to enter the cavern alone. First, she promised the riches of the abyss. Then she claimed her lord would take revenge. Finally, she tried to convince me that reproduction would drain away my life. None of those claims came with evidence. I recorded the knowledge of the abyss she revealed, but accepted no bargain that required releasing her immediately. The summoning contract did not return her automatically after the offering was consumed. That meant the scroll's true function might not have been to invite a demon temporarily, but to pull the target entirely into the prime material plane. That result was far more dangerous than a single boon and far more valuable. I had Catherine examine Evelyn's mana fluctuations from a distance. The life level of a high succubus far exceeded that of an ordinary human. If the system could fuse the bloodlines reliably, the reward for her offspring would inevitably be greater. On the other hand, if the succubus bloodline dominated, the newborns might not fall under absolute dominion. In 2 weeks, the system's racial classification of the offspring would determine whether I maintained this bond. After Evelyn became a prisoner, my first questions concerned the hierarchy of the abyss, demonic contracts, and summoning conditions. Truth and lies mingled in her answers, so I gave the verifiable parts to Catherine for comparison, then used the system's notices to confirm the bloodline effects. High demons brought rewards far beyond those of ordinary humans, but their children were also harder to control. The clan therefore established a separate guarded area, and no charm-capable offspring could use that power against a companion without orders. In 2 weeks, the system would reveal the experiment's result. Then I would know whether the succubus bloodline could truly strengthen the Caesar clan. The kobolds spent more than 10 days rebuilding the territory. First, molten iron reinforced the ground, then hard stone slabs covered it. The walls were divided into individual chambers and fitted with glowing crystals. The place was still crude, but at least it no longer resembled a garbage dump on the verge of an epidemic. Catherine's second birth produced 5 more children, including 2 flame-blooded elites. Together with the first group, she now had 10 children, 3 of whom had the innate talent to cast Fireball directly. I received another 5 points in every attribute and 20 points of fire element mana. I now had enough mana to cast 3 fireballs in succession. Evelyn's first offspring, meanwhile, exceeded every expectation. 8 common tier offspring and 2 elite tier offspring. Reward all attributes plus 20 charm, plus 10 charm resistance plus 10. The children had pale skin, black demonic markings, and pointed ears, inheriting both succubus and goblin blood. A succubus was supposed to bear only succubus offspring, yet the system had made the dark goblin bloodline dominant. Evelyn stared at the children, clearly unable to accept the result. She continued trying to trade charm for freedom. I did not believe her and maintained the guard. Demons were born deceivers. One careless moment could cost the entire tribe dearly. The first demi-human goblins had grown for only a month, yet their bodies were already approaching adulthood. The common offspring were no weaker than humans, while the flame-blooded elites could cast 3 to 5 fireballs in succession. Once every child matured, the tribe would possess the combat power of true classed fighters for the first time. As I inspected their training, a tremendous crash sounded outside the wall. A cave spider 7 or 8 feet tall was battering the wooden barrier. Its body was covered in black, metal-like armor, and its crimson compound eyes moved constantly. An adult cave spider could rival a mid-level classed fighter. It should have lived deep underground, not appeared here on the outskirts. It had either lost its way or been driven from its territory by a stronger creature. Either possibility meant a new threat might have appeared nearby. The wooden wall split under repeated impacts, and the spider had already fixed its eyes on the newly matured offspring. Our renovations had added more than private chambers. They included a reservoir, a food warehouse, and 2 layers of walls. The kobolds had reinforced the foundations with molten iron, but could not cast a complete wall all at once, forcing them to build it in sections. The spider happened to strike an unfinished gap, still blocked with wood. Evelyn's hybrid children were quieter than the demi-human goblins, and their demonic markings glowed whenever their emotions changed. When 2 elite infants looked toward the guards, ordinary goblins even forgot their orders for a moment. To prevent their mental abilities from going out of control, I separated charm training from the living quarters. The number of animals along the perimeter had already fallen abnormally before the cave spider appeared. Its abdomen was shrunken and its carapace bore old wounds, as if it had fled a great distance. Even if a stronger creature had displaced it, it would still regard the infants in my territory as the easiest available food. I ordered ordinary followers to carry the children into the stone chambers and had the kobolds seal the inner door. The flame goblins held the second line, while I made first contact alone. An adult spider moved far faster than its size suggested. If it entered the living quarters, its webbing would turn every narrow passage into a trap. The cave spider followed the scent of food into our territory. The first guard vanished without even leaving behind a scream. From his final image, I determined that the creature could move soundlessly across the ceiling. I extinguished the torches in the main passage at once and scattered fine ash and gravel over the ground. The spider could conceal its body, but not its weight. Once tracks appeared, the spear formation stopped chasing shadows. It sealed the landing points instead, turning the darkness that belonged to the hunter into a tool for locating it. I also had 2 teams strike the rock walls in alternating rhythms, using vibrations to disrupt the spider's sense of the prey's location. Several times, it lunged toward the loudest sound and caught only an empty hide bag suspended in advance. When real spears stabbed from the side, the creature had already left the ceiling where it fought best and lost its rhythm of hiding again after every kill. I drew my greatsword and advanced. This was more than an intruder. It was the first target that would test the Caesar clan's new strength. After breaking through the wall, the cave spider spread all 8 legs. Its carapace had no obvious gaps. My first strike left only a shallow mark, while the recoil numbed both my arms. Breaking through the armor head-on would not work, so I changed targets immediately. A carapace could cover the body, but it could not make moving joints equally hard. I avoided the legs stabbing toward me and cut through 2 joints on the same side with consecutive blows. The spider lost its balance and sprayed webbing from its mouth. I failed to dodge in time and was instantly bound. The more I struggled, the tighter it became, and the strands were stronger than ordinary iron wire. A flame goblin rushed out of the cavern in time and used Catherine's staff to cast fireball. The explosion forced the spider back and ignited the web around my body. The moment flames appeared, the savage monster instinctively retreated. I picked up one severed leg and found that heat quickly penetrated its shell. The carapace could resist blades, but could not insulate against high temperatures. The trapped heat would cook the organs sealed inside it. The webbing was just as vulnerable to fire. Once I found the weakness, there was no need to continue a direct contest. I had goblins advance with torches from several directions, driving the spider into a prepared cavern, then sealed the exit behind an iron door. The cave spider still had value. Its silk could be made into traps, ropes, and light armor. A strand as thick as my little finger could suspend several tons. I decided to attempt domestication, assigning my flame-blooded offspring to guard and feed it. If it remained impossible to control, I could always kill it later. The 2 severed legs went to the kitchen. After I ate the meat inside, the system repeatedly announced a 1-point increase in every attribute. More surprisingly, divine power extracted a racial ability from the flesh. Rare tier talent acquired dark carapace. You may transform your skin into a hard carapace. It can be strengthened further by consuming minerals and improving constitution. Weakness cannot resist high temperatures. Fire damage taken is doubled. I hardened the skin on my arm. My knuckles made a metallic sound when I tapped it. When my first blow hit the carapace, even the greatsword's edge curled. The spider then used the compound eyes on both sides of its body to thrust from multiple angles in rapid succession, keeping me from approaching its head. After I cut through 2 joints, it lost support on one side, but could still move quickly on the remaining 6 legs. The silk was not only sticky, it also carried a mild paralytic. After it wrapped around me, my arms rapidly lost sensation. The flame-blooded offspring did not attack the spider directly. First, he burned away my restraints, then used a second fireball to block the creature's charge. For the first time, one of my blood descendants had truly saved me in battle. After driving the spider into the cavern, I had small goblins feed it through the iron bars so no guard entered its reach. At least 6 torches had to burn at all times, and if 2 went out, they were replaced immediately. Every charge at the door brought a warning burst of flame. Gradually, it learned to remain in the dark corner. After obtaining dark carapace, I tested it separately with a dagger, a long sword, and low-temperature fire. Ordinary blades could barely cut it, while flame rapidly heated the hardened layer. The talent was useful against physical enemies, but dangerous to maintain around a fire mage. The stronger an ability, the more carefully I had to remember its conditions. Otherwise, my so-called defense could become a furnace shell trapping me inside. I tested dark carapace in stages with a stone knife, black iron, and flame. I did not treat it as an absolute defense merely because the system called it rare. The shell excelled against cuts and impacts, but its joints, eyes, and interior remained vulnerable. While sustained heat softened its surface, I gave the results to the demi-human offspring responsible for training so they could learn to attack the same weaknesses in similar enemies. A new ability was nothing more than personal display until it was understood and incorporated into tactics. The defense came with a deadly weakness. but it was enough to let me withstand the attacks of most mid-level monsters head-on. Dark carapace greatly improved my defense, and the cave spider's remaining materials were suitable for weapons. But the kobolds could only smelt crude ore. They had no ability to work such a hard shell. Human blacksmiths lived on the surface, but until I resolved the threats underground, I would not provoke the churches and classed fighters at the same time. I organized the ordinary goblins into scout teams and sent them exploring the tunnels around the Ironstone clan. Meanwhile, Catherine and Evelyn continued bearing offspring. 1 month later, the total number of children surpassed 50. I called Catherine's descendants demi-human goblins. They had physiques and intelligence approaching those of humans and could learn weapons, battle aura, and magic. I called Evelyn's descendants charm goblins. They could influence emotions, while elite individuals could even control weak-willed targets. This new people had outgrown the name of an ordinary tribe. I formally named it the Caesar clan and regarded myself as its first chief. Just as I prepared to give the offspring another 2 months to develop, one scout goblin suddenly vanished from visual sharing. Switching to a nearby companion's view, I saw more than 100 gnolls surrounding the Ironstone mine. The kobold elder was explaining where the ore had gone when an exceptionally large gnoll seized him by the throat. The creature then caught the scout's scent and killed the goblin whose vision I had borrowed with a single swipe. I withdrew from the shared vision and immediately summoned every adult offspring and servant. The gnolls had discovered the mine's change of ownership earlier than expected. If I had 1 more month, I was confident I could defeat them with ease. But I could not abandon the iron mine and the followers whose order I had only just established. I led the Caesar clan toward the mine. The enemy chief was named Huchai Bloodclaw. According to the kobolds, he had brought nearly 100 warriors and commanded the even larger Bloodclaw clan. 50 direct offspring did not mean 50 mature soldiers. The ordinary demi-humans still had to learn language and coordination. The charm goblins needed to control their mental abilities, while the flame-blooded individuals could accidentally injure allies. I arranged the earliest maturing group into fixed squads, with each elite leading 4 common members. They began with patrol and escort duties. After establishing the Caesar clan's name, I ordered the kobolds to carve a common emblem into the ore warehouse and the territory's entrances. For low-level monsters, a territorial symbol was more direct than any spoken concept. Every team bearing the mark represented the same chief and was forbidden to fight another when Bloodclaw appeared. I had not yet obtained the Dragon's Eye and could only switch from one scout's view to the next. After the first died, a second hid beneath a mine cart and watched the kobold elder being interrogated. Huchai refused to believe goblins could have killed the overseers. He assumed the Ironstone clan had hoarded the ore and was already preparing to execute the elder as a warning to the entire mine. I took every offspring capable of fighting but left the flame infants and ordinary followers to defend our home. If the main force failed, at least the tribe might continue. The mine's narrow passages prevented 100 gnolls from spreading out at once and made it easier for charm and fireballs to cover their formation. The Bloodclaw clan was more aggressive than the kobolds. Its scouts actively hunted strangers entering its territory, and bone alarms covered the camp perimeter. I did not send goblins into a frontal assault. Instead, I cut off 2 hunting trails, forcing the gnolls to move together as their food ran short. They relied on the chief's prestige to maintain order. Once every member saw that their leader could not defeat me, the remaining resistance would quickly lose all meaning. This battle would determine whether the Caesar clan could hold its first true territory. As Huchai Bloodclaw prepared to kill the kobold elder, I struck his chest with a fireball. The explosion hurled him backward but failed to kill him. He rose through the smoke, seriously injured yet still full of vitality. The moment he recognized that his attacker was only a goblin, he ordered nearly 100 gnolls to charge. The charm goblins behind me activated their mental abilities together. The enemies in the front row faltered. Several even turned their weapons against their companions, swiftly throwing the tight formation into chaos. Huchai identified me as the center of it all and leaped over the crowd toward me. I activated Dark Carapace and took his claws head-on. The talons scraped across the hardened layer, leaving only a few shallow lines. Once I confirmed the defense worked, I stopped retreating and swung my great sword through his shoulder and chest. When Huchai fell, the surviving gnolls immediately lost heart. The demi-human goblins sealed the exit with cave spider silk, while the charm goblins continued disrupting the enemy formation. Trapped front and rear, the gnolls finally stopped resisting after nearly half of them died. They threw themselves prone in submission. One gnoll that spoke the common tongue crawled before me and begged me to accept the Bloodclaw clan's allegiance. Low-level monsters had no stable faith. Attaching themselves to the strong was their most common means of survival. They submitted to me today and might turn to someone stronger tomorrow, but killing every prisoner would give me only corpses. Leaving them alive would add nearly 100 warriors to my force. From this moment on, the Bloodclaw clan will serve the Caesar clan. I accepted their allegiance and assigned the gnolls to outer patrols and frontal combat. The kobolds continued mining, while my goblin offspring held command and controlled the key abilities. For the first time, the three forces had clearly defined roles. Taking Bloodclaw was only the beginning. The system remained the core of my growth, and stronger bloodlines produced better descendants and greater rewards. Evelyn had proven that quality often mattered more than quantity alone. I had to find more powerful bloodlines. But I also had to consolidate the territory already before me before expanding again. The first fireball merely set the fur on Hu Chai's chest ablaze. He smothered it at once and rallied his clansmen with a roar, proving a chief did more than possess a larger body, he could command as well. I had the charm goblins interfere only with the front row, so their mental power would not disperse across the entire enemy force and become ineffective. When Dark Carapace blocked Hu Chai's claws, the impact still drove me half a step backward. The true advantage of nearly 100 gnolls was not their chief, but their ability to surround me. If my duel with Hu Chai lasted too long, the ordinary offspring would be worn down. I therefore concentrated my strength into a single diagonal cut and ended the fight between chiefs first. Not every gnoll surrendered the instant Hu Chai died. Those at the rear tried to flee back to their clan. Only the webs I had placed in advance sealed the single exit. The remaining enemies did not begin throwing themselves down until they had lost their commander, their escape route, and half their number. Before accepting their allegiance, I made the common-speaking gnoll repeat the rules. They could not attack a member of the Caesar clan. They had to answer every call to war, and all spoils would be distributed centrally. In exchange, their chief would not slaughter followers without reason and would supply food from the mining region. Rules could not guarantee eternal loyalty, but they told the gnolls what obedience earned and what betrayal would cost. After taking control, I retained Bloodclaw's existing hunting captains and let the gnolls continue using familiar gestures. I claimed only the right to choose their targets and allocate the spoils. The gnolls received a steadier food supply and black iron weapons in exchange for guarding the outer border. The first combined patrol consisted of 1 demi-human goblin, 1 kobold guide, and 6 gnolls. They were openly hostile to one another at first, but after repelling a monster together, they shared their prey for the first time. As for the words I kept repeating to myself that every choice was for the clan, it no longer mattered whether they were a goal or an excuse. The Bloodclaw clan consisted of more than those 100 warriors. It originally had roughly 200 members. The other half guarded a black iron vein farther away, along with 300 kobolds from the Black Iron clan. Black iron had been tempered by mana tides over many years. It was twice as hard as ordinary steel and conducted mana. One might not find a single vein among dozens of ordinary mines. Since it was only 3 to 5 hours away, I could not possibly leave it in the hands of a potential enemy. I ordered the newly submitted gnolls to lead the way, leaving only part of our force to defend our home while every other follower set out. The underground passages intersected like a honeycomb, and the rock walls could block both scent and mana. I would rather take a longer established route than risk tunneling into the nest of an unknown monster. 3 hours later, we reached the Bloodclaw clan's original settlement. Only its old and weak remained, and they offered no organized resistance. After securing control, I continued toward the Black Iron mine. Before we even reached the mine, I smelled fresh blood. The worst possibility was that a stronger monster had already occupied the vein. I sent a small team in first and observed through visual sharing. Large numbers of wounded kobolds and gnolls filled the mine, but the attackers were gone. Their wounds were clean cuts, more like the work of weapons than claws or fangs. Most of the newly mined black iron had also been stolen. The enemy had come for a specific purpose and withdrawn as soon as it secured the ore, making no attempt to occupy the mine. Ordinary low-level monsters could not use black iron directly, much less organize such a precise operation to acquire it. The raiders both understood the resource's value and possessed good weapons and discipline. I had expected this campaign to be nothing more than accepting a second group of followers. Instead, an unknown competitor had appeared. The black iron vein was harder to work than ordinary iron, and the kobolds could extract only a small amount each day. Its strategic value was immense, however. Weapons made from it could conduct mana, while armor was twice as hard as normal steel. If another power controlled it for long, it would eventually use superior equipment to suppress me. The army avoided several unknown presences along the way. Through visual sharing, I saw enormous scale marks scraped across the wall deep within one tunnel. While another passage was filled with paralyzing spores, I would rather take an extra hour than waste my newly submitted followers in an irrelevant battle. After reaching the Black Iron Mine, I first examined the directions of the wounds. Most of the dead had been struck from the front with sharp weapons, while a few had injuries on their backs. The raiders had not pursued after breaking through the defenses. They had driven the guards away and gone straight for the warehouse. Their short, deep footprints were not large, but each supported tremendous weight, the stolen or had been loaded onto specialized carrying frames. Fragments marked the trail until it reached an area of solid rock, where it vanished. The enemy knew the mine and had attacked near a shift change. They might have watched the place for some time and simply found its past output too small to justify a raid. The guards' wounds were precise, while only half a broken sword and heavy boot prints remained at the scene. The raiders had taken no food and slaughtered no miners. The ore had clearly been their sole objective from the beginning. I had my people measure the stride length, weapon height, and hauling marks. The evidence suggested a short people with great strength and excellent equipment. Before I knew they were dwarfs, those were the only conclusions the clues supported. Any more specific guess could direct our defenses toward the wrong enemy. If the enemy could keep raiding the mine, I would not be able to hold it even after taking possession. Finding them had become more important than suppressing the remaining gnolls. The mysterious raiders had already devastated the Black Iron Mine's defenders. My forces rushed in together and quickly subdued the remaining gnolls. The Black Iron Clan's elder led his people to kneel and pledge allegiance. I accepted, incorporating every adult miner into the Caesar Clan's production system. One gnoll found half a broken sword inside the mine. It was made from ordinary steel, yet the edge was exceptionally sharp. When it struck my one-handed greatsword, it left a deep notch. If the material was the same, the difference could only lie in the forging technique. The raiders not only possessed excellent weapons in quantity, they probably had the means to produce them reliably. The surviving gnolls could describe only two traits: the attackers were short, but extremely strong. None had seen their race clearly, so I sent goblins to search the surrounding tunnels in separate groups. A settlement capable of transporting black iron could not be too far away. If they remained active underground, they would eventually leave tracks. The territory remained stable for the following month. The Ironstone and Black Iron clans continued mining. Bloodclaw guarded the borders, and my adult offspring took charge of patrols and training. My descendants gradually approached 100 in number, including 5 flame-blooded elites and more than 10 charm elites, the equivalent of over 20 novice-classed fighters. The scouts lost nearly 10 ordinary goblins while mapping most of the surrounding region. About 20 ogres lived to the northwest. Each was enormous and individually powerful. The Caesar clan might have defeated them, but at a terrible cost, so I avoided them for the time being. There was still no trace of the mysterious raiders. Just as I began to wonder whether they had left through a hidden passage, a surge of intense fire element energy erupted inside the settlement. 4 common tier offspring and 1 chieftain tier offspring. Reward all attributes plus 24 fire element mana plus 101 grimoire of flame. The chieftain tier offspring came from Catherine. That single reward raised my mana above that of most elite mid-level mages. The broken sword's edge bore no magical inscriptions, proving its sharpness came entirely from craftsmanship. If ordinary steel could be made this effective, black iron would become even more dangerous in the raiders' hands. I had the kobolds preserve the fragment and divide it our or among several storage sites, so the next attack could not carry everything away at once. During the month of stable growth, the demi-human goblins began training with the ordinary weapons the raiders had left behind, while the charm goblins joined interrogations and sentry duty. 5 flame-blooded elites took turns training the newly matured, reducing Catherine's teaching burden. The territory no longer relied on me to arrange every minor task. The intelligence on the ogre settlement made me postpone further expansion. It had only 20 adults, but a frontal charge from them could tear through any line of low-level followers. Until we possessed better armor and ranged control, the gain from taking them would not repay the losses. When the chieftain tier flame infant was born, the cavern walls heated on their own and nearby crystals began to melt. Catherine had to use a water element scroll to lower the temperature. The child cast no spell. The environmental change came from his overflowing bloodline alone. That meant he might not only wield flame as an adult, but naturally alter the elements across a battlefield. The temperature rose so quickly at his birth that ordinary cloth nearly ignited. I moved him into a stone nursery basin and had Catherine test his magical reactions from a distance. The chieftain Tyr noticed described his future limit. It did not make an infant invincible. He still had to learn to control fire, distinguish companions, and obey tactics. The system's reward went into my body. The child's development required the clan's continued investment. The first time he opened his eyes, he reacted to the grimoire of flame, causing the lower-level spell models on its pages to light by themselves. I put the book away immediately and used an ordinary torch to train his senses instead. A high-tier artifact could amplify talent, but it might also let an infant skip the fundamentals of control. The clan needed a spellcaster who could follow orders, not a source of fire ready to explode at any moment. More important still was the grimoire of flame the system had granted me. It was an upper-tier magical artifact normally possessed only by high-level classed fighters. The grimoire of flame contained 100 fire spell models, 12 upper-level spells, 24 middle-level spells, and 64 lower-level spells. By feeding it fire element mana, I could cast them without the long process of learning. The grimoire also increased their range and power while reducing their mana cost. I completed the contract with a drop of blood. The grimoire transformed into a flame-shaped mark and merged with the back of my hand. A thought could summon it whenever I needed it. For my first test, I selected the middle-level spell Wall of Flame. A curtain of fire more than 30 feet long sealed the tunnel in an instant, consuming roughly 1/5 of my mana. By that estimate, even with the grimoire's assistance, I could currently cast only one upper-level spell. That was still enough to face a high-level mage directly. At last, the Caesar clan possessed a hidden card capable of changing a battlefield. I then visited the newly born chieftain Tyr offspring. Beside the 4 ordinary children, an infant burned with controlled flames, and his red skin seemed to contain flowing magma. The fire harmed neither Catherine nor the other children, proving it was a bloodline ability rather than a loss of control. Even in infancy, the child radiated pressure approaching that of a high-level monster. Once he matured, he would at least rival a cave spider and become the clan's second mid-level combatant after me. After checking on the child, I went to the cavern holding the cave spider. Its missing legs had regrown, and its body was stronger than before. The flame goblin on guard said it had accepted feeding at fixed times, but still tried to charge the door whenever the torches went out. Domestication had not succeeded yet, but it produced enough silk for new defensive nets. As long as fire remained present, the spider did not dare launch a true attack. Standing outside the iron door, I reassessed the Caesar clan's current power: 2 mines, 3 subordinate clans, nearly 100 blood descendants, a cave spider, a chieftain tier flame offspring, and a newly acquired upper-tier magical artifact. Those forces were enough to establish myself on the outskirts, but not enough to challenge surface humans or the powers of the deep underworld. The 100 models inside the grimoire did not automatically become my knowledge. It was more like a spell library I could call on at any moment. Without the artifact, I could still construct only Fireball on my own. If the grimoire were sealed or taken, the complex spells would vanish with it. I therefore had Catherine continue teaching me fundamental control. Once contracted, the grimoire could hide as a mark, reducing the risk of an enemy identifying it beforehand. It could also adjust a spell's scale according to the mana supplied, but it could not eliminate the cost. Even casting one upper-level spell would leave me unable to use more magic for a short time. Before testing Wall of Flame, I had the kobolds clear the passage and place wet cloth on both sides. Even so, the heat ignited wooden frames more than 30 feet away. The true danger of high-tier combat extended beyond a direct hit. It included the heat waves, debris, and loss of oxygen outside the spell's apparent range. The chieftain tier offspring responded more slowly to my bloodline command, but still could not truly defy it. He hid behind Catherine, showing greater intelligence and stronger emotions than an ordinary infant. I decided not to treat him as a mere weapon. Catherine would teach him language, while I taught him combat and the rules of the clan. I recorded the cave spider's regenerative ability as well. With sufficient food, a missing limb could regrow in about a month. It could not be allowed to roam free, but it could serve as a lasting source of silk and an unusual defensive unit within the territory. The Grimoire of Flame did not hold unlimited magic. It contained a tiered collection of models. Lower-level spells were most numerous and formed fastest, while the devastating upper-level models rapidly drained mana. I recorded the range, area, and recovery time of each, dividing the 12 upper spells into single target, area, defensive, and control categories. The Grimoire let me cross the threshold of spell casting without years of study. but it could not make decisions for me. One mistaken wide area flame inside a narrow cave might bury my own clan before the enemy. After the test, I had Catherine demonstrate the 3 most useful lower-level fire spells and taught the flame offspring common gestures and a ceasefire command. Only I possessed the grimoire, but basic spellcasting had to be reproducible. If every ranged attack in the territory depended on its chief, a single expedition would leave our home completely defenseless. The real problem remained the mysterious raiders who could forge fine weapons and steal black iron without leaving a trace. The cave spider had grown accustomed to its feedings, but still refused to produce silk on command. When a mana tide rose, it even returned to its original frenzy. If it could not produce resources, continuing to feed it only wasted food. I entered the cavern personally and ordered it to spin. The spider crouched in a corner and watched me through its compound eyes, then suddenly stabbed with one leg. I activated Dark Carapace, took the blow head-on, seized the leg, and hurled the creature's entire body against the ceiling. The moment it rose, I struck its head again and again. After repeated enhancements, my physique had grown so strong that an ordinary cave spider could no longer penetrate my defense. Once I confirmed it still refused to obey, I summoned the Grimoire of Flame and prepared to end the attempt at domestication. The moment fire elements began to gather, the spider rolled onto its back, exposed its abdomen, and tucked in its legs in surrender. I ordered it to spin again. At last, it sprayed out so much white silk that it nearly covered half the cavern, then collapsed in exhaustion. I immediately had my followers bring in monster carcasses and increased its food allowance. That proved the cave spider was not impossible to tame. It simply had to understand the cost of resistance. As long as we continued feeding it, it could repeatedly produce silk strong enough to support several tons. While the goblins gathered the silk, 2 hidden sentries watching the cavern entrance vanished one after another. Before the second died, visual sharing showed me a figure emerging from the darkness and killing him with incredible speed. The enemy wore black equipment, excelled at concealment, and could locate carefully hidden sentries with precision. This was not another inexperienced novice party. It was a group of mid-level classed adventurers with detection abilities. I did not send followers to block each stretch of tunnel. Instead, I withdrew every subordinate into the territory and preserved the battlefield we knew best. Demi-human goblins held the passage. Charm goblins hid on both flanks. The flame-blooded offspring prepared to cast together. And the kobolds and gnolls formed the front line. I sat on the steel throne and waited for them to pass through the open gates. I did not treat the spider silk as ordinary loot. First, the flame offspring tested its heat resistance. Then small kobold craftsmen twisted several strands into rope. A single strand feared fire, but was several times stronger than hemp of the same thickness. Once soaked in resin, the silk could also become carrying nets, tripwires, and close-fitting soft armor. It would soon replace every crude rope we had previously used to restrain prisoners. To make the spider produce silk reliably, I standardized its feeding and commands a complete carcass after it spun, and reduced food whenever it attacked a keeper. It tested the system 3 times before finally learning that obedience was the only way to survive inside the territory. Within days, the first usable mounds of white silk had accumulated outside the spider cavern. The hidden sentry's deaths interrupted the resource plan. The first guard sent back no image at all, proving the attacker had killed him in one blow. The second heard footsteps and turned, only to glimpse a dagger wrapped in black cloth. The enemy was not merely fast, but knew how to move through blind spots. If ordinary followers remained in the narrow passage, they would only be eliminated one at a time. I deliberately removed the traps along the route and had my people leave fresh tracks and abandoned torches at several forks. The intruders would assume the tribe had discovered them and withdrawn in haste, focusing their attention on the walls and ground. The true killing formation waited in the plaza, elevated firing positions for the flame goblins, mental interference from both sides. A heavily built front line able to close ranks in an instant, and the newly harvested spider silk nets. Before the battle, I moved Catherine into a stone room far from the plaza, though the soul artifact might still point the enemy toward her. If the rescuers broke through the first line, the guards were not to kill her without orders. They would close the isolation door and continue delaying instead. A living target would force the enemy to act cautiously. A dead one would make them abandon all thought of retreat. Every follower received the same orders: do not pursue anyone feigning death, do not touch unknown potions, and break the connections between party members first. This time, I would learn whether the grown Caesar clan could defeat a complete mid-level adventuring party head-on. Through the eyes of the final hidden sentries along their route, I saw the intruders clearly. The party consisted of a female warrior, an assassin, a male mage, and a heavy shield bearer. Every member was a mid-level class fighter. They carried a glowing crystal that brightened as they approached the tribe. From their conversation, I confirmed that this was no ordinary extermination contract. Catherine's family had hired them to find the missing noblewoman. The crystal contained the aura of her soul and could reveal her direction and whether she still lived. Their leader was named Isabel. She quickly noticed that all the hidden sentries along the route had withdrawn and realized someone was deliberately allowing them inside. But the party had invested too much time and money in the mission, and they could not explain a last-minute retreat to the nobles who had hired them. They could only continue. Isabel had the mage search repeatedly for traps. The passages within my territory, however, had been scrubbed clean. There were no falling rocks, pits, or poisons. In the previous battle, I had relied on an ambush. In this one, I wanted the enemy to waste its attention on traps that did not exist. When the four reached the settlement entrance, they first saw walls reinforced with iron and gates standing completely open. Hundreds of kobolds, gnolls, and goblins of different bloodlines stood in formation across the plaza. The contempt on their faces vanished at once. Ordinary goblins could never have built such a territory, much less ruled two other low-level monster races at the same time. Isabel stopped outside the gate to observe, but I gave her no time to continue judging the situation. "Adventurers, welcome to my domain." My voice crossed the plaza. Every follower stepped aside at once, allowing the four to see the throne and the flame and charm offspring concealed behind the formation. Their goal was to rescue Catherine. Mine was to turn this party into a new resource. The soul crystal confirmed that the outside world had not abandoned Catherine. At each fork, the four adventurers held the crystal in different directions and waited for its flame to settle before moving on. It could not reveal an exact distance, but it was enough to steer them away from irrelevant caverns. No wonder they had found us inside this enormous underworld. Isabel was far more cautious than the young leader of the first party. She kept the heavy shield bearer in front, assigned the assassin to check their tracks from behind, and had the mage leave frost marks along the escape route at regular intervals. Even when they found the clues I had deliberately exposed, she did not rush after them. She first examined the walls and ceiling on both sides. Yet the more cautious they became, the more attention and mana they spent on an empty path. Using the steel throne's still incomplete awareness of my territory, I adjusted the plaza's formation in sequence. The kobold spears could not pierce heavy armor, so they were responsible only for blocking routes. The stronger gnolls stood in the first line to absorb the charge. The flame offspring formed 3 groups. If a spell suppressed one, the other 2 could continue casting. The newly produced spider silk nets lay just inside the gate, waiting for the enemy to lose its retreat. When the 4 finally saw the throne, I saw their equipment clearly. The shield, staff, and greatsword all shone with mana, and antidotes and smoke bombs hung from the assassin's belt. These were scarce resources for a newborn clan. As long as I controlled the area of the explosions, I could preserve the adventurers themselves, their equipment, and the intelligence they possessed. After the main gate closed, the 4 still had a side passage that appeared to offer escape. I deliberately left it open, placing a web and a second heavy door only at the end. An enemy with no retreat would fight desperately at once. But a sliver of hope made them more likely to move in the direction I had designed. Isabel examined the side passage several times, but still chose to protect her companions at the front. That told me the mission and her party mattered more to her than personal survival, a fact that would later become the key to restraining her. The steel doors closed slowly behind them. Now that they had come this far, they would not leave as easily as they had entered. Hogan, the assassin, moved first. He vanished and tried to cross the monster army to kill me directly. The flame goblins on watch detected the change in heat. A pillar of fire forced him out of stealth, and several fireballs exploded around the party. The male mage recognized middle-level fire magic and finally understood that they were not facing an ordinary tribe. I summoned the Grimoire of Flame and poured all my remaining mana into the upper-level spell Blazing Nova. Fire elements compressed into a blinding sphere near the cavern roof. Isabel had only just shouted for a retreat when the flames dropped into the center of the 4. The explosion melted the ground and shattered the mage's ice shield. The assassin, male mage, and shield bearer all lost the ability to fight. Only Isabel remained mobile behind the protection of her battle aura. She did not abandon her companions and flee. Instead, she charged straight for the throne. If she killed the caster, the others might still have a chance. She cut through the gnolls in her path one after another, and low-level followers could barely approach her. I ordered the charm goblins to launch a mental assault. Isabel faltered for a moment, then broke free through a stronger bloodline power. Scales surfaced across her skin, dragon horns grew from her head, and her body rose to more than 10 feet tall. As draconic pressure spread, the ordinary kobolds and gnolls instinctively retreated. Only my blood descendants, protected by dark divine power, maintained their formation. It was a faint but genuine dragon bloodline. Isabel had not reached the level of a high-tier monster, which meant the blood had been diluted over generations or implanted later in life. But my offspring had a chance of atavism. Even if only a trace remained at the source, they might reactivate a purer draconic power. I changed my plan immediately. This woman could not die. To avoid pointless losses, I ordered every offspring to clear a path to the throne. Isabel believed her draconic pressure had frightened them off. Gripping her greatsword, she charged toward me. Hogan did not retreat after the pillar of fire forced him out. He used a smoke bomb to conceal himself and lunged toward the dais again. The charm offspring immediately disrupted his sense of direction as several webs dropped from the side. He cut through the first, but the second stuck to his ankle, and the gnolls pinned him down. An assassin was most dangerous when he appeared without warning. Once his position was exposed, he was physically weaker than a frontal warrior. The heavy shield bearer drove his shield into the ground and tried to give the mage time to cast. The instant an ice wall rose, the flame offspring positioned in 3 separate places bombarded the same point. Ice and fire filled the area with steam, conveniently concealing the intense light as blazing nova formed. The male mage did not realize the real attack was coming from above until mana trembled over his head. I deliberately shifted the center of the spell toward open ground. If an upper-level fire spell struck directly, it would incinerate all 4 adventurers along with their equipment. The offset blast was enough to crush their defenses while leaving the strongest among them, Isabel, capable of moving. It tested her abilities and preserved a living prisoner who might possess a special bloodline. When draconic pressure spread, I felt my dark divine power openly rejected for the first time. It was not a simple fear spell, but the natural command of a higher creature over inferior bloodlines. The ordinary follower's knees weakened, creating a gap in the formation. Isabel seized it at once and rushed the dais. Her judgment was sound: kill the one in control, and the monster army might collapse immediately. But fear did not disable absolute dominion. I had the followers open the path on purpose while drawing the hellish residual heat back into the grimoire. She thought she had broken through the encirclement. In truth, I had merely separated her from her party. After Isabel transformed, the flame offspring recorded that her scales deflected ordinary fireballs to either side. While mental assaults affected her for only an instant, her weakness was not elemental resistance, but the steady physical drain of maintaining the transformation. If taking her alive proved impossible, I had intended to rotate the front line and wear her down, then use the grimoire of flame against the ground beneath her. Once I discovered the value of her bloodline, that lethal plan immediately changed to isolation, exhaustion, and restraint. Even while charging, she kept looking back to check her companions' positions, proving the transformation had not taken her reason. I therefore forbade my followers to kill the wounded from behind. I would not drive her into one final attack with no concern for the cost. Sometimes taking a powerful enemy alive did not require adding pressure, but ensuring that person could always see one reason worth laying down a weapon. She still did not know that the grimoire of flame had never been my only way to fight. Isabel swung her sword at my shoulder. The blade cut through the surface but became lodged in dark carapace, leaving only a shallow wound. I seized the blade, forced the weapon back, and drew the greatsword beside the throne to counter head-on. Her transformation had enhanced her strength and speed, but the repeated rewards from nearly 100 offspring had made my body stronger still. After several clashes, her arms began to tremble. I pinned her heavy sword with one hand, forced both her knees to the ground, then kicked her from the dais. The demi-human goblins immediately threw a web over her and bound her completely. She still tried to fight, so I placed a blade beside her gravely wounded companions. Stop resisting, and they might live. Isabel might not care about her own life, but she could not watch her companions die because of her. At last, she released her weapon and called me a despicable monster. I had never denied it. Leading the weakest of goblins to survival in the underworld was never going to be possible through fairness and honor alone. I assigned followers with the best healing abilities to keep the 3 adventurers alive and confined Isabel separately. She was different from Catherine. Ordinary threats could not compel her cooperation for long. I could only turn her companions' lives into leverage. forcing her to accept captivity and the bloodline bond the system required. When she resisted violently again, I injured one of the male mage's arms and told her clearly that her companion would pay the price the next time as well. Isabel finally became still, though none of the rage left her eyes. I knew such control would never create loyalty, and I did not describe it as taming her. For her, it was total defeat. For me, it was a coerced bargain secured with force and hostages. Every stroke Isabel made in her transformed state carried tremendous air pressure, and the aftershock cracked stone pillars beside the throne. She had clearly received formal training. First, she used the broad blade to block my view, then twisted her wrist without warning to attack the joints. With the body I had possessed just after reincarnation, I could not have survived the first exchange. Now, each blade that struck my carapace produced nothing but a trail of sparks. I did not use magic at once. Blazing Nova had consumed most of my mana, and close combat offered a better test of my true physical limit after so many attribute enhancements. By the fifth clash, blood ran from the web of her hand. By the ninth, her battle aura could no longer cover the entire blade. My breathing remained steady. The gap between us was larger than she had expected. When webs dropped from 4 directions, she tore through one layer with her dragon claws, but could not escape the second. The mucus-soaked strands tightened with every struggle, the first weapon I had prepared after training the spider. My followers secured her together with the greatsword, keeping everyone beyond the reach of her transformed claws. The healers did no more than stop the 3 wounded adventurers bleeding and set their broken bones. I would not restore them to fighting condition. They were bargaining chips and sources of intelligence on the human class system. Whenever Isabel tried to break free, I let her see that her companions were still alive and that their treatment could end at any moment. This was not an honorable victory. My followers held the advantages of terrain, numbers, intelligence, and hostages, and only through all 4 did I gain a prisoner capable of wielding dragon blood. But the clan did not face contests of honor. It faced survival. The next party would only be stronger. I had to transform every scrap of power gained here into a future defense. After the battle, the 3 severely wounded adventurers' equipment was sealed in separate places so none could obtain another weapon. The assassin had the least serious injuries, but was held in a brightly lit area without shadows. The mage's hands were immobilized, while the shield bearer was kept far from any metal he could turn into armor plates. Isabel could confirm through the guards each day that they remained alive, but she could not exchange plans with them in private. This control maintained a truce, not trust. I never confused the two. If the system could truly pass on the dragon bloodline, the next offspring would redefine the Caesar clan's upper limit. Several days later, Isabel's abdomen showed a visible change. She quickly guessed the dark goblin reproductive cycle and understood that a new bloodline was growing inside her. Several times, she stared at a guard's weapon, only to abandon the thought when she saw that her companions remained imprisoned. I maintained their food and treatment, ensuring the leverage never lost its effect. Isabel cooperated with the basic requirements of survival, but never stopped expressing her hatred through her eyes. While inspecting the other caverns, I discovered a crystal pendant among the adventurers' equipment. A flame inside it always pointed toward Catherine and burned brightest near her quarters. Catherine recognized it as a soul artifact. Priests of the Soul Church and Soul Mages sealed the target's aura inside, allowing the bearer to track that person across a great distance. If the flame went out, the target was dead. Her parents had created 3 of them when she came of age. Her family had hired this mid-level adventuring party. Catherine then confessed that her grandfather had once been the Empire's greatest legendary fire mage, making her family one of the highest noble houses in the imperial capital. She warned me that if they confirmed she had fallen into the hands of monsters, they would not only send stronger rescuers but might erase every witness to preserve the family's reputation. She proposed that I release everyone immediately and promised to conceal what had happened for the sake of the children. I refused. If all 3 soul artifacts could track her, freeing one party would not remove the threat. On the contrary, this failure would confirm that an unusual power existed along the outskirts. But Catherine's warning reminded me that the next rescuers would certainly be stronger. A mid-level party had been annihilated. If the family acted again, it would send at least high-level class fighters, perhaps even top-tier ones. The soul artifact's shell was made of silver and a transparent crystal. Its flame was not an ordinary element, and even the grimoire of flame could not extinguish it. I had Catherine move behind different thicknesses of rock and confirmed that its direction always remained accurate, while its brightness increased with proximity. Moving her to another cavern could delay a tracker, but would not sever the connection. More troubling still, Isabel's party had now been missing for some time. Their employer might not know where they had fallen, but would certainly know the mission had run past its deadline. If the family possessed a second soul artifact, its agents could follow the same route to the underworld entrance, then narrow their search through the battle traces. Hiding an entire clan was far more difficult than hiding one person. I made Catherine write down every force her family could mobilize, the location of its fief, and its internal enemies. At first, she would reveal only her grandfather's identity. When I pointed out that the first rescue had failed and a second group might silence her along with everyone else, she admitted the family was not united. Some wanted to save her, some cared more about a marriage alliance and reputation, and others hoped to divide the inheritance after the legendary Mage died. Those conflicts might slow the next pursuit, but they were no guarantee of safety. I ordered removable false doors added at the outer entrances and reorganized every patrol into two groups that watched one another. If one lost contact, the other was not to attempt a rescue. It had to send the images back to the throne immediately. The dwarves had not yet submitted to me, and our weapon stock was limited, so the available black iron went first to arrowheads, door bars, and heat-resistant shields. Isabel's dragon blood was my most certain opportunity for a breakthrough. If one of her offspring reached leader tier, the territory would possess a unit truly capable of resisting a high-level classed fighter. Until the children were born, every pointless expansion had to stop. Catherine's family crest and the names of places in the imperial capital were copied twice. One copy remained in the core territory, while the most human-looking demi-human offspring memorized the other. If I ever had to negotiate with the family, we would at least name them correctly. At the same time, every personal mark was removed from captured equipment, so no merchant caravan could recognize the belongings of missing adventurers. An underground secret was not defended by one door, but by ensuring countless small clues never assembled a route for outsiders. Isabel's first dragon-blooded offspring had not yet been born. I had to use the remaining time to strengthen the tribe and learn how much power Catherine's family could still mobilize, from lowest to highest. The classed ranks were apprentice, novice, intermediate, advanced, top, master, and legendary. A legendary could change the course of a war and even contend with an adult dragon. A kingdom with millions of people might not have even one legendary guardian. Catherine's grandfather was such a person, but he was nearing the end of his life. He had not appeared in public for years, and rumors even claimed he was already dead. Without a legendary's deterrence, other nobles had steadily devoured the family's businesses and lands. Her family had planned to marry Catherine to the direct heir of another legendary family, buying protection through a marriage alliance. Refusing to become a bargaining chip, she fled the imperial capital alone and eventually encountered me. It was bad news, but also a temporary opportunity. Catherine's family still had advanced mages and might even possess top-ranked classed fighters. Any one of them could devastate the present Caesar clan, but they also had to contend with noble infighting. If they had strength to spare, they would not have hired only a party of intermediate adventurers the first time. In the short term, the next force I faced was more likely to be another hired party than the legendary Mage himself. Half a month passed. Catherine and Evelyn each completed another birth and entered a new pregnancy cycle, while Isabel still showed no sign of giving birth. Dark Goblin offspring were normally born within 2 weeks. Her pregnancy had clearly exceeded that period. I ruled out a deliberate termination. Her companions remained in my hands, and the guards had observed nothing unusual. The only reasonable explanation was that a dragon bloodline required more time and nourishment. I dispatched followers to search underground for magical herbs and high-energy monster flesh to sustain the 3 mothers. Through long-term consumption of magical herbs, Catherine's mana had already reached the intermediate rank, and her chance of producing elite offspring had increased by roughly 1/3. Evelyn, as a high demon, improved more slowly, but had not weakened either. Consuming magical herbs directly wasted most of their effect. Alchemists and potion makers, however, were even rarer than mages. I could not find one underground and had no choice but to compensate with quantity for the time being. Catherine's explanation of the class ranks made me recalibrate my own strength. An intermediate could serve as a captain in a small city. An advanced could exterminate an ordinary monster settlement alone. Top-ranked classed fighters formed the core of a kingdom's army. An enormous gulf separated masters from legendaries, who could already alter terrain, lifespans, and the fate of an entire noble house. With the grimoire, I could cast upper-level magic, and my body could overpower an intermediate warrior. But that did not make me a true advanced. The grimoire had a limited number of models and consumed mana, while absolute dominion worked only on followers who belonged to me. If an enemy bypassed the army and destroyed the throne itself, both territorial vision and group enhancements would suffer. I did not relax after one victory. We added 3 isolation gates to the entrance, divided the important followers among different living areas, and moved Catherine and Isabel to separate regions. Even if we suffered a wide area spell, the clan would not lose every core bloodline at once. Isabel's appetite suddenly doubled in the 3rd week, and ordinary monster meat no longer satisfied her. I rationed the few stocks of mana moss, salamander hearts, and high-energy crystal cores in the warehouse, while healers recorded her pulse and mana fluctuations each day. She refused to thank me, but actively demanded more when food ran short, showing that she did not want the children to die from malnutrition either. The long gestation also revealed the future cost. A high-tier bloodline was not merely a number in a system notice. It consumed vast amounts of food, magical herbs, and guard time. To bring chieftain-tier offspring to adulthood, the Caesar clan needed stable production rather than an eternal dependence on plunder. I did not make a plan to defeat a legendary family, only one to delay it. The outer caverns could be abandoned. The warehouses could be emptied. Followers could withdraw along 3 alternate routes. Only the nursery, the throne, and the core bloodlines had to be defended. If the enemy consisted only of hired adventurers, the cost in resources and casualties might persuade them to retreat. If a legendary appeared personally, the clan had no chance in a frontal battle. Admitting that gap did not weaken my rule. It kept me from wagering the entire population on a moment of pride. Isabel's pregnancy was nearing a month. The longer it lasted, the more clearly it proved that these children possessed bloodlines far stronger than any before them. I continued supplying Isabel with magical herbs and high-level monster meat. After another half-month, a dragon's cry finally sounded from her cavern. Pressure spread across the entire territory, and every ordinary follower instinctively fell to its knees. For leader-tier offspring and 1 chieftain-tier offspring, reward all attributes plus 181 portion of metallic dragon blood, 1 chieftain-tier draconic talent scroll. Previously, only 1 flame offspring had reached leader tier, now 4 appeared at once. As adults, they would at least rival intermediate class fighters. The chieftain-tier descendant began from an even higher point and might enter the advanced level of combat power directly. All 5 children were generally human in appearance, with silver-gray vertical pupils. Undeveloped protrusions rose from their backs and tailbones, like the beginnings of future wings and tails. The largest was the chieftain-tier individual. I named this branch dragon-blooded goblins. Isabel held the children with a complicated expression but did not harm them. She still rejected me, yet could not direct the same hatred toward newborn lives. The new offspring exposed another problem. No matter how efficient the system made me, a clan dependent on my reproduction alone would never rival the human population. My blood descendants had excellent potential and were better suited as officers, spellcasters, and core fighters. I should not spend them all in ordinary warfare. Once the demi-human, charm, and dragon-blooded goblins matured, they could form families with followers not separated from them by a racial barrier. Kobolds and gnolls reproduced quickly and in large numbers, making them suitable as the outer population. As long as pairings occurred only after adulthood, the 2nd and 3rd generations would expand much faster. That method would not provide me with direct system rewards, but it would solve the shortage of ordinary soldiers and laborers. I began restructuring the clan. The core bloodlines would govern and fight. The kobolds would handle production. The gnolls would protect the borders and wage wars of attrition, and mixed blood descendants would be assigned according to their talents. Before the dragon's cry sounded, every metal weapon in the cavern began vibrating at the same time. The 5 children were not weak after birth. They instinctively gripped the stone bed and left shallow marks with their fingertips. When the chieftain-tier child opened his silver-gray eyes, the phantom of a dragon briefly appeared inside them. Even the gnolls guarding the entrance did not dare raise their heads. I subjected the flame offspring, demi-human offspring, and newborn dragon-blooded children to the same strength test. An ordinary flame goblin could move 1 chunk of ore, a demi-human could lift 3, and a leader-tier dragon-blooded infant pushed 5 before even reaching adulthood. The chieftain-tier child unconsciously drew in iron filings from his surroundings, clearly inheriting an affinity from a metallic dragon. When the system's reward descended, my bones and muscles strengthened again. I could even make out fine dust falling from the cavern roof. Compared with the scattered increases of 5 or 10 points before, A gain of 180 proved that high-tier offspring were the true shortcut across ranks. But a draconic pregnancy took nearly 3 times as long and could not be repeated without limit. The second-generation plan was therefore about more than quantity. I recorded each adult offspring by bloodline, talent, and temperament. The flame bloodline would form families first with followers who possessed mana. The demi-human bloodline would improve intelligence and discipline. The charm bloodline would not spread for the time being. The dragon bloodline had to wait until complete adulthood and confirm stability. Every pairing would occur only between adults, so no one was harmed before a bloodline had fully formed. The clan's army also changed from units divided purely by race to mixed squads. A demi-human goblin capable of understanding orders held command, kobolds scouted and hauled supplies, gnolls handled the frontal assault, and flame offspring provided ranged attacks. Future mixed-blood descendants would enter the role best suited to them. The newborn dragon-blooded offspring required several times the food of ordinary infants. Before any dwarves joined us, I had the kobold miners gather iron-rich rock powder and mix it into high-energy monster flesh to see whether the metallic bloodline could absorb it. The chieftain tier child instinctively gathered iron filings, but his body temperature also remained low, requiring the flame offspring to stabilize the environment. High-tier bloodlines had different physical needs. Feeding them all the same way would only waste their potential. Isabel asked to care for the weakest child personally. I allowed her to move under the eyes of 2 guards. Her attitude toward me did not soften, but she corrected errors in the children's feeding. Blood made her the most reliable caregiver, while also giving us, for the first time, something we both had to protect beyond our otherwise absolute hostility. For the first time, the Caesar clan had a way to grow that did not depend entirely on my personal reproduction. The metallic dragon blood rewarded by the system came from a steel dragon. There was only one mass of silver-gray blood, yet it was as large as an adult human, and the power within made nearby metal vibrate constantly. I immersed my body in the dragon blood. Power seeped through my pores, and fine scales gradually covered my dark gold markings. Faint steel dragon bloodline acquired. All attributes plus 300 physical damage reduction plus 10% mana and elemental affinities increased. Rare talent acquired lesser dragon transformation. In transformed form, all my attributes rose further, and I radiated draconic pressure capable of suppressing low and mid-level monsters. I gained an additional 20% reduction in physical damage, while my fire magic grew more powerful and expansive at a lower cost. In my normal state, I could now defeat an intermediate-class fighter with ease. After transforming, I might even contend with a top-ranked one. I then crushed the Chieftain Tier Draconic Scroll. Chieftain Tier talent acquired Steel Throne. Its first ability let me command every monstrous follower who belonged to me, rather than goblins alone. Its second could summon the Dragon SI to watch any region within my territory, pierce concealment and mental effects, and block outside detection. The third used a Dragon's Soul to strengthen my followers, raising every attribute, granting 20% physical damage reduction, and suppressing enemies with draconic pressure. I sat on the throne. Silver light immediately transformed its steel structure, and an illusory dragon's soul coiled behind it. The territory appeared inside my mind as a clear map: the 2 mines, the gnoll camp, the residential caverns. And the location of every follower could all be enlarged at will. Fog still covered the map's edges, showing that the Dragon SI fully covered only territory that belonged to me. As I tested the vision, a cluster of red lights rapidly approached the black iron warehouse. When I magnified the image, I saw a group of short creatures wearing fine armor and carrying heavy weapons. The steel dragon blood did not burn like fire as it entered me. Instead, it felt like molten metal cooling along my bones. With every heartbeat, new silver-gray lines spread from my chest. Once the fusion ended, an ordinary short sword left only a white line across my scales. Even an enchanted weapon barely cut the surface. Lesser dragon transformation was not without cost. Spreading my wings and maintaining dragon scales steadily consumed mana, while my enlarged body had difficulty passing through narrow tunnels. Repeated tests showed that the complete form was best suited to a short, decisive battle. Keeping only a few scales active was most efficient at ordinary times. Percentage-based damage reduction worked well against common attacks, but could not negate penetration, soul, or law-based abilities. The Steel Throne had limits as well. It could command only monsters that had willingly joined the clan, not control enemies from nothing. The Dragon SI covered recognized territory, while unexplored caves remained under fog. The farther away I projected the Dragon Soul enhancement, the more it cost, and the less time it lasted. If I directed all its strength to a mine, the defenses around the throne would weaken. I recorded every limitation, then had different followers enter stealth, smoke, and mental illusions. The dragoness I saw through ordinary concealment and distinguished false sounds, but could not look directly through thick layers of ore. It was more like countless observation points distributed throughout my territory than the flawless vision of a god. Even so, the talent transformed the way I ruled. In the past, orders had to pass through messengers layer by layer. Now I could notice a warehouse falling under attack and project instructions directly to the scene. The invading dwarves believed they faced scattered groups of monsters. They did not know the entire territory had become a body under my control. After putting the Dragon's Eye into operation, I divided the territory into 3 rings: core, production, and border. Any unfamiliar signal in the core woke me immediately. Guards assessed events in the production ring first. Small monsters were permitted to pass through the border, so constant alerts would not exhaust me. The throne provided too much information. Without priorities, every argument and footstep would trap the ruler instead. I also assigned the demi-human offspring to summarize unusual events once a day rather than making me handle every detail personally. Tunnel collapses, food shortages, and guard disputes each had a designated official. Only problems beyond their authority were reported. The steel throne expanded the scope of my rule. Sensible delegation prevented every decision from bottlenecking with one person as that scope grew. Their direction was certain, proving this was not their first visit. At last, the mysterious raiders who had stolen the black iron and left a broken sword 2 months ago had returned. The dragoness I showed me the invasion clearly. The short warriors quickly knocked down the patrolling gnolls, smashed open the warehouse doors, and used their own tools to haul away black iron ore. They did not pursue the kobolds because they wanted the miners to keep producing. These people stood little more than 3 feet tall, but their muscles were exceptionally developed. Hundreds of pounds of armor and warhammers barely slowed their movements. They were dwarves. Dwarves were born with powerful bodies and were famous above all for forging. An ordinary steel weapon made by any competent dwarf could surpass a masterpiece from the human world. The Caesar clan had always lacked craftsmen. Now those craftsmen had walked willingly into my territory. I activated the steel throne, ordered the surrounding followers to seal every retreat, and projected the throne's draconic power into the mining district. By the time the dwarves loaded the ore and emerged from the warehouse, hundreds of kobolds and gnolls stood in formation under the firelight. Through the steel throne, I projected myself into the center of the army and gave them 2 choices: join the Caesar clan or die here. The gray-bearded dwarf elder did not surrender. He raised his warhammer and led his people in a frontal breakout. The dwarves truly possessed astonishing strength. They drove the gnolls in the first row backward, while ordinary weapons could barely penetrate their armor. But they had already entered my territory. The dragon soul strengthened every follower, while draconic pressure suppressed the dwarves in turn. I summoned the Grimoire of Flame and cast the upper-level spell Judgment of Flame. Pillars of fire descended from the cavern roof one after another, covering the dwarf formation with precision. Their metal armor heated rapidly, forcing them to abandon the charge and seek cover behind rock walls and mine carts. I did not burn them to death. Corpses could not forge weapons. Living dwarves had value. When the pillars contracted into a ring of fire, I spoke again. The dwarves' movements revealed their familiarity with the mine. 2 broke the locks, loaded the ore into wheeled iron chests, and the remaining members kept watch in shifts. They took only black iron of the highest purity and did not bother picking up fragments scattered across the floor. Proving an established furnace and settlement of craftsmen stood behind them. After the first frontal collision, I ordered the kobolds to withdraw immediately. Unenhanced spears only snapped against dwarven armor, making any further sacrifice pointless. The gnolls switched to hooked ropes to pull at the shields, while the flame offspring attacked only the armor joints and the ground, using heat from below to force the dwarves to move. Every swing of the gray-bearded elder's hammer released a short flash of lightning, proving he had at least the power of an intermediate warrior. None of the other dwarves appeared obviously weak, either. In an open formation, a few dozen of them could have routed several times their number in ordinary monsters. But the warehouse passage was narrow, and their heavy armor prevented quick changes in direction, making it ideal for dividing them with fire. When Judgment of Flame descended, I controlled the distance between the pillars so only one person could stand in each gap. The dwarves did not burn to death, but they were forced apart and could no longer protect one another with their shields. The dragon soul-enhanced gnolls seized the ore chests, then locked the iron gate across the retreat completely. My final demand for surrender did not come from mercy. If the Bronzebeard clan pledged allegiance, I would immediately acquire a mature system of forging. If it continued resisting, I could only destroy the strongest and keep the captives willing to work. As the fire began closing inward, the gray-bearded elder tightened his grip on the scorching warhammer and finally understood that this was not a mining raid from which they could simply force a retreat. The longer the fiery blockade continued, the more likely the mine was to collapse. I had the kobolds pour water constantly over the rock, monitored the spreading cracks, and held the temperature above what armor could endure but below what the stone could bear. Only when the dwarves saw that I could control both the battlefield and the mine itself did their will to resist truly waver. A strong ruler who burned everything deserved only fear. One who understood how to preserve furnaces and craftsmen might become a lord they could follow for years. Next time, the flames want to avoid anything vital. Tell me where your settlement is, and choose again. Hog Bronzebeard, the dwarf elder, swung his warhammer and forced a path through the fiery blockade, leading his people out. Some dwarves had suffered burns, but their formation remained intact. I activated the Steel Throne's third ability. The dragon soul roared behind the throne, and draconic power flooded every follower at once. Scales and vertical pupils appeared on the kobolds, gnolls, and goblins, while their bodies and strength increased dramatically. The dwarves who had easily knocked down the gnolls quickly discovered that their opponents had become true draconic warriors. 2 gnolls could now suppress 1 armored dwarf, while flame goblins disrupted their coordination from the rear. I had ordered them in advance to take as many prisoners as possible. The dwarves' forging knowledge mattered more than their corpses. Seeing me still seated on the throne, Hog suddenly spun his warhammer and hurled the lightning-wreathed weapon with all his strength. The lightning struck the throne. I entered dragon form, caught the hammerhead with one hand, and crushed until the entire weapon twisted and cracked. I spread my wings, crossed the battlefield, and blasted Hog out of his formation with one blow. Before he could regain his footing, I released draconic pressure. The force of a higher bloodline bearing directly upon the dwarves halted every act of resistance. Weapons struck the ground one after another. Submit or be destroyed. At last, Hog lowered his head and, in his authority as elder, declared that the Bronzebeard clan would serve the Caesar clan. I accepted their allegiance and made their future duties clear. The clan would provide ore and forging materials, while the dwarves would produce weapons, armor, and other metalworks. When Hog heard that they would not have to abandon their furnaces or find their own materials, he visibly relaxed. For dwarves, forging itself mattered more than who owned the weapons. With a stable supply of ale as well, they might even consider this an ideal life. When Hog broke out of the fire ring, the dwarves at the front overlapped their shields into a semicircle, while those behind counterattacked through the gaps with short-handled warhammers. The formation had clearly survived countless underground battles. Any ordinary gnoll that approached would face 2 or 3 weapons at once. I did not order my followers to ram it. Instead, the flame offspring first heated the rock beneath the dwarves' feet. After the dragon soul enhancement descended, the greatest change was not size but discipline. The gnolls, who normally lunged on instinct, began filling gaps in the line without being told. The kobolds maintained a spear formation even under lightning. The Steel Throne distributed my will among every squad, making dozens of chaotic individuals move like a single living creature for the first time. Hog's enchanted warhammer carried lightning and moved so fast that only a blue streak remained. I could not see its path clearly until I transformed, and the impact still numbed my palm. If both wielder and weapon could make me feel that, they were close to the advanced rank. But once the hammer left its master, no matter its strength, it was only metal. I exerted force along its internal fractures and destroyed the enchantment structure directly. After the battle, I did not confiscate every personal possession the dwarves owned. I took only their weapons and arranged treatment for the wounded. The terms of allegiance were equally clear. The Bronzebeard clan would retain its elders and forging traditions, refrain from attacking other followers, and prioritize the Caesar clan's orders. In exchange, it would receive a steady supply of black iron, food, safety, and ale once we began brewing it. Hog did not become loyal because of a single threat. He saw that further resistance would exterminate his people, then realized my terms were better than stealing or for the rest of their lives. He pressed a hand to his chest in the dwarven salute, and a new follower mark appeared within the Steel Throne. Only then did I release the fiery blockade completely. Once Bronzebeard's allegiance was complete, the Steel Throne marked its members more distinctly than the kobolds while preserving their individual emotions. I could compel an order, but I had not erased Hog's grief for the dead and wounded. After the battle, I allowed the dwarves to collect their dead, had the clan supply the materials for treatment, and recorded both sides' casualties. Any conquest that failed to count its losses would repeat the same mistakes during the next expansion. I gained not only several dozen powerful warriors, but the complete system of craftsmen the Caesar clan had lacked most. The entrance to the Bronzebeard settlement was hidden behind a boulder weighing several tons. My scouts had passed it repeatedly without ever imagining a village stood beyond the stone door. The settlement had been built around a vent of subterranean magma and was more than 30 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the tunnels outside. Its black iron deposit had long since been exhausted. More than 100 gray dwarves could sustain their forges only with stored materials. Their population grew extremely slowly. 10 or even several dozen years might pass before one child was born. Hog led me into the armory. Centuries of blades and armor lay piled like small hills, and even the newest pieces by the entrance remained sharp. Grey Dwarf enchantment forging did not rely on spell models. They hammered materials containing mana directly into a weapon. Each effect was narrow, but its destructive power could be pushed to the limit. Most of the equipment had been made for dwarven bodies and fit goblins perfectly. Gnolls and lizard folk would require alterations. I first selected a suit of black iron armor, then noticed an enormous pitch-black battle axe among the oldest weapons. Its edge seemed to swallow the surrounding light, while dried blood still stained the handle. Merely approaching it made me feel a consciousness calling. Hog stopped me from touching it at once. He said it was a cursed ancestral weapon forged by the Grey Dwarf forebears from the shattered soul of a legendary orc. That orc had once challenged the gods, only to have even his soul broken apart. The day after the battle axe was created, its smith went mad and died. Over the following 1,000 years, hundreds or thousands attempted to draw it. Everyone was consumed by its chaotic will. Hog attributed every death to a divine curse. But I heard another possibility in the description. The will of the legendary warrior still remained inside the axe, and anyone who touched it had to endure its mental assault. The greater the danger, the greater the weapon's true value. The Bronzebeard settlement was not wealthy. Though its furnaces burned day and night, only a thin layer of black iron remained in storage, and many craftsmen could do nothing but melt down old weapons. Children were scarce, while the elderly made up nearly half the population. If the Caesar clan had not found them, they might have been forced to migrate or disappeared entirely when the ore ran out in several decades. I had Hog first list the resources his clan urgently needed, then count the furnaces ready for immediate use. Kobolds would transport, or the gnolls would guard the stone door, and the dwarven craftsmen would no longer divide their attention with patrols. Their first orders were to resize the stored armor and produce standardized spearheads, pickaxes, and iron door hinges. Weapons were only one part of a forging system. Production tools also determined the speed of expansion. The equipment in the armory showed me the difference between mature craftsmanship and crude ironware for the first time. At the same weight, a Grey Dwarf shortsword was thinner and harder, with its balance closer to the guard so a goblin was less likely to lose it while swinging. The armor joints used overlapping iron plates that revealed no obvious gap even when the wearer crouched. Simply changing equipment would spare another group of ordinary followers from death. The black battle axe was completely unlike everything around it. The other weapons bore maintenance oil and inventory numbers. No footprints marked the stone plinth around this one, and the wall held layer after layer of warning symbols. Hog said an elder had once tried to melt it, only for the furnace to extinguish itself when the axe drew near. Others attempted to throw it into an abyss, but the carriers slaughtered one another before reaching it. I allowed no follower to accompany me when I touched it. Dark divine power could protect my mind, but could not guarantee an unknown curse would not control me. If I behaved abnormally, Hog was to seal the armory immediately, while the other followers withdrew beyond the steel throne's range. The weapon was worth a risk, but the clan could not share a danger with no known limit. Before entering the armory, I had Hog recite every known record of the legendary battle axe. The deaths varied across the centuries. Some went mad, some killed themselves after days of silence, and some attacked those closest to them. It sounded more like the weapon magnified each bearer's fears and obsessions than a single poison. Dark divine power could resist mental corruption, but it could not answer the questions posed by a remnant soul for me. I ordered everyone to step back and approach the battle axe the Bronzebeard clan had sealed away for centuries. Hog told me that the dwarves were divided into several branches. Mountain dwarves worshipped the gods of order and forging and combined alchemy with their craft. Volcanic dwarves specialized in magical weapons. gray dwarves followed the oldest and purest tradition of forging with souls and materials. For that reason, they had broken with the mountain dwarves and been driven underground. The Bronzebeard clan belonged to the gray dwarves, and the black battle axe was both the most dangerous and the most powerful creation of their ancestors. The instant I gripped its handle, a blood-red battlefield swallowed my awareness. An orc stood amid countless corpses and roared at the gods overhead, before descending divine power shattered his soul. Slaughter, rage, despair, and defiance poured into my mind at once. The previous bearers had not been killed by the Axis blade. The legendary warrior's lingering memories and emotions had crushed them. This was no ordinary curse. It was a trial of inheritance. Orc tribes commonly preserved an ancestor's will inside a bloodline weapon. Once a descendant earned its approval, that person inherited part of its power. The battle axe before me cared nothing for blood. It judged only whether the bearer possessed a sufficiently strong will. I did not release it. If I could not suppress a fragment left by a dead man, I had no right to speak of the future. The chaotic will continually magnified my urge to kill and tried to make me attack every living thing nearby. I entered dragon form, protected my mind with dark divine power, then pushed back against the remnant soul inside the axe. A name written in blood gradually appeared at the end of the weapon, Hell's Roar. As my hand closed around the handle, I first lost all awareness of the outside world. Then came the smell of blood, smoke, and mud scorched by flame. The memory was not an image but the complete battlefield preserved at the legendary orc's death. The weight of every corpse and the sensation of every breaking bone flooded my mind through the battle axe. The orc had led his tribe in resistance against the temple's taxes. At first, he had only wanted to defend their land, but as the war expanded, slaughter gradually consumed him. He defeated human legions and killed members of his own race who refused to follow him, then blamed the gods for every failure. The remnant soul held both unyielding courage and enough madness to destroy its bearer. Dark divine power formed a barrier at the edge of my consciousness, while steel dragon blood steadied my body. Whenever the axe tried to make me see nearby lives as enemies, I used absolute dominion to confirm the location of each follower, letting my real territory cover the false battlefield. That murderous urge could not deceive someone who never forgot why he fought. There was no way to judge how long the trial lasted. Perhaps only a few breaths passed outside, but within the memory, I seemed to endure years of war. In the end, I could distinguish the genuinely useful knowledge amid countless chaotic emotions: how to maintain balance in heavy armor, how to add an enemy's charging force to my swing, and how to choose the shortest line of escape when surrounded. When the name Hell's Roar appeared, it was more than the battle axe's name. It felt like the remnant soul's final question. It did not seek a powerful body, but a master whose judgment would not be taken by fear and anger. Gripping it, I stepped forward into the blood-red battlefield. The inheritance's greatest value lay not only in techniques, but in failures. The legendary orc had once lost his rear force while chasing bait, split his own formation in a rage, and treated every dissenter as a coward. Those fragments showed me how strength became isolation. Hell's Roar could pass on power without forcing its next master to inherit the fate of a man who had made war his only answer. The final image the remnant soul revealed was the tribe's empty camp after its destruction. It had defeated countless enemies, but left no one to inherit the victories. I answered it with the name of the Caesar clan. The weapon would defend a people still growing, not continue a dead warrior's endless search for enemies. The axe had once belonged to a legendary orc who dared swing a blade at the gods. If I truly passed the trial, I would gain not only a legendary weapon but the skill he had accumulated across countless battles. After I suppressed the urge to kill, a radiant phantom of a god appeared within the inheritance realm. A giant hand descended from the heavens. As its pressure grew, fear became easier and easier to magnify without limit. I did not yield. I raised Hell's Roar and struck the divine phantom instead, with no reverence to sustain it. It shattered like foam. This was only the memory of the legendary orc's final battle, not a true god descending. Then the orc's remnant soul finally appeared. It acknowledged that I had passed the trial and offered me its power, but demanded that I inherit its will and complete its unfinished war against the gods. I would accept the combat skills, not the destiny. The remnant soul tried to force its convictions into my consciousness, so I tore that obsession apart. Dark divine power filtered the shattered soul. The frenzied memories dispersed, leaving only fighting techniques tempered through countless brushes with death. The strongest was called Peerless Slash. It concentrated all the body's strength, speed, and fighting spirit into one attack, destroying the target along the shortest possible path. The technique approached the mortal limit, yet still could not touch the authority wielded by gods. The elements of earth, wind, water, and fire formed the world's foundation, while authority determined its supernatural laws. The true strength of gods did not come from higher attributes alone, but from their ability to invoke those laws directly. Without power on the same plane, even the most perfect combat technique could scarcely injure a god's true body. I awoke from the inheritance realm with Hog still watching me tensely, tightening my grip. I pulled the battle axe that no member of the Bronzebeard clan had drawn in centuries from its stone plinth. Hell's roar appeared immensely heavy, yet I could wield it with one hand. A casual arc of force split the mountain wall and left a fissure hundreds of feet long. Hog was speechless. The pressure of the divine phantom had not been entirely false. It came from the legendary Orc's fear when he faced true authority and therefore recreated the same suffocating sensation. The more I treated it as a god, the more powerful it became. Once I recognized it as memory alone, it lost the foundation that maintained it. What I shattered was not a true deity, but the defeat the remnant soul had never overcome. The Orc's obsession then became chains, attempting to carve vengeance against the gods into my mind. Accepting all of it might have granted more complete power, but I would have become a continuation of another dead man's will. I preferred losing part of the inheritance to letting a 1,000-year-old war decide the Caesar clan's future. After dark divine power consumed the frenzied portion, the remaining combat skills stayed behind as physical memory. I did not need to recite techniques. My steps, breathing, and exertion aligned naturally, but Peerless Slash drained most of my stamina in an instant. If the first strike did not finish the enemy, my defense would weaken noticeably afterward. It was suited to decapitation, not repeated use among common soldiers. After awakening, I cleared everyone from the attack radius and tested the axe against different materials. The force split ordinary rock and left a deep mark in a black iron plate. We had not yet discovered mithril, so I could not determine its limit. Hell's roar reacted to blood and fighting spirit. The more intense the bearer's emotions, the sharper its edge became. That was precisely its greatest danger, and my will had to restrain it. Hog knelt before the stone plinth, not to me personally, but to the ancestral work that had finally left its seal. I told him to rise and ordered every warning in the armory preserved. A legendary weapon had recognized a master. That did not mean its curse had vanished. No one could touch it again without permission. After drawing the battle axe, I did not allow anyone to study it immediately. Hog could examine the runes only while I held it, and even his measurements used wooden tools. Dark divine power had filtered the legendary remnant, but the weapon itself still responded to killing intent. After each training session, I used dark power to quiet the blade and recorded whether I experienced any abnormal impulses. Being able to lift a dangerous weapon did not mean the danger was gone. For the Grey Dwarves, their clan's greatest treasure had finally found a master. For me, from that moment on, the Caesar clan possessed a melee weapon capable of threatening a top-ranked classed fighter. A silver light flashed deep inside the mountain wall. Hell's roar had split. I released flame to illuminate it, only for the mana to vanish rapidly as it approached. Hog recognized a vein of mithril, usually found near black iron. Mithril was tougher still, could absorb and resist elemental power, and served as a core material for high-level armor and magical equipment. One complete vein was worth more than 10 black iron mines. I immediately decided to bring in kobolds to extract it and told the Bronzebeard clan to assess the deposit first. As I dug out a sample, a lizard man lunged from the darkness. I stopped its attack with one finger and released a trace of draconic pressure. The attacker immediately lost the ability to resist. Lizard folk were communal monsters. If one appeared in the mine, a tribe had to live nearby. My followers searched along the vein and soon discovered a settlement of 200 at the other end. The camp was unnaturally quiet, and the air was filled with the aura of death. After the gnolls tore open its fence, rotten lizard folk corpses rose from the ground one by one. Hog confirmed that undead magic had reanimated the dead. In ancient times, an undead calamity had swept across the continent, and the dead had continually transformed more victims into undead. For that reason, every living race considered them a common enemy. I did not let my followers fight at close range. I covered the camp with blazing nova. The heat burned the ordinary undead to ash, so their remains could not assemble again. Before the flames went out, heavy hoofbeats sounded from the depths. A black-armored death knight emerged astride a skeletal warhorse, and every fire weakened as it passed. After the silver ore was exposed, Hog tested it repeatedly with sparks, acid, and enchanted needles, eventually confirming it was not ordinary companion silver. Mithril actively repelled free elements. When he placed the sample beside the grimoire of flame, the light visibly dimmed. Armor made from it would be both strong and capable of weakening most elemental attacks. The vein happened to lie behind the fissure left by Hell's Roar, meaning the Bronzebeard clan had lived one wall away from treasure. I did not respond by ordering blind excavation. The rock around Mithril was harder. Blasting it could cause a collapse and transmit the mana disturbance even farther. The kobolds first dug ventilation tunnels, the dwarves designed the supports, and the lizard folk transported ore from high-temperature areas. The lizard man who attacked had several rotting wounds, though life remained in its pupils. Once draconic pressure subdued it, the creature haltingly described black fog attacking the settlement and the dead rising again. It had not been guarding the vein. It was fleeing a home that had become a graveyard. As the scouts approached the settlement, they first saw no sign of fighting along the fence. Only then did they notice the bodies on the ground. The undead magic had erupted everywhere inside at the same time, giving no one a chance to escape. If I sent followers indirectly, anyone who fell might become part of the enemy force. The fire attack was not merely an assault, but the most complete form of purification. When the Death Knight appeared, some unnatural chill seemed to suppress the surrounding fire elements. It ignored its companions and the settlement and pointed its lance directly at me. That reaction showed its orders were not to guard the lizardfolk corpses, but to test or eliminate whoever discovered the vein. When the mithril sample reached the furnace, nearly the entire first batch was ruined. With too little heat, the ore did not melt with too much. It absorbed the enchanted flame. Hog could only forge a small amount between layered black iron to produce several protective plates. Building a true mithril equipment system would require new furnaces, fuel, and techniques. Discovering treasure was only the beginning. The ability to use it reliably determined whether it became power. The ordinary undead were expendable. This Death Knight with the strength of an advanced class fighter seemed to be the real guardian sent by whoever controlled them. The Death Knight raised a hand and condensed Death's grasp. A giant black hand passed over the sea of fire and reached for my followers. I swung Hell's Roar, and the force of the axe tore the spell apart. It drove its skeletal warhorse into a charge. I met it with the newly inherited Peerless Slash. Concentrating my strength into a single point along the blade, I severed the lance, then crushed the knight's skull and its mount. The most difficult part of fighting the undead was their repeated resurrection. So I pulverized the core bones completely and gave them no chance to reassemble. An advanced Death Knight had no independent intelligence, meaning a necromancer or lich had to stand behind it. Anyone capable of creating such a servant casually was at least close to the top rank and, with sufficient preparation, might summon an even stronger undead army. I could not determine the hidden controller's location and could only leave sentries for the time being. The mithril deposit was too large to remain hidden forever. We had to extract as much as possible before the enemy acted again. Further searches around the mining region discovered 2 more lizardfolk settlements of 200 each. Hog explained that mithril gathered mana and enriched the nearby resources. Lizardfolk could also consume companion minerals to strengthen their skin and claws. So the presence of multiple settlements was hardly surprising. Their bodies still contained an extremely faint dragon bloodline. A sense of hierarchy was carved into every draconic descendant's instincts, and higher dragon blood naturally suppressed the lower branches. I entered dragon form and released draconic pressure over both settlements. The 400 lizard folk did not charge. They threw themselves to the ground instead, regarding me as a higher draconic descendant and offering their allegiance willingly. I accepted them through the steel throne and assigned the lizard folk to defend the mithril mines and serve in heavily armored combat units. 600 lizard folk had originally lived near the mining region. 200 had been transformed into undead, while the remaining 400 now served the Caesar clan. After I cut Death's grasp apart, the black fog did not dissipate immediately. It slid along the ground and coiled around my followers' ankles. Several kobolds' skin rapidly turned gray. I ordered the flame offspring to burn away the connections at once, then carried the injured out of the settlement. Undead power corroded the living. The longer a close battle lasted, the greater the price my side would pay. The Death Knight's lance work was rigid but flawless. Every thrust targeted the heart, throat, or joints. It never tired and never fell for a feint. Peerless Slash happened to counter that mechanical defense. I first used the back of the axe to alter the lance's line. then concentrated every ounce of force into the knot of death energy inside its breastplate. When the edge fell, black armor and bone shattered together. The remaining black fog tried to burrow underground. I used the last fire of blazing nova to burn every bone fragment into white ash, leaving only an incombustible mana mark. Whoever stood behind the knight might already have witnessed the battle through that connection. I did not pursue. Leaving my territory to search blindly would only lead into a prepared trap. The other two lizardfolk settlements initially prepared to fight as well. They hid their young and food in fissures, while the adults formed two lines at each entrance. Only when I spread my steel dragon wings and the survivor recognized scales like those on an ancient totem did hostility become fear and reverence. After their allegiance, I did not move them into the core territory at once. Both settlements retained their original leaders and guarded the mithril region's perimeter. The Caesar clan supplied black iron weapons and flame support against the undead, while they provided maps, prey, and patrol records. When 400 new marks appeared within the Steel Throne, the mithril mine finally gained its first local defense line. The newly submitted lizard folk were deeply sensitive to death. After 200 of their kin had become undead, they asked to burn their relatives' remains before joining the patrols. I agreed and assigned the flame offspring to oversee the rite so no corpse could be used again. At the end of the allegiance ceremony, the leaders surrendered bone tablets carved with the locations of their water and nests. More than kneeling, those maps proved they were entrusting their survival to a new order. But the victory was incomplete. The Death Knight's appearance proved an unknown controller had reached into the outskirts. Its temporary withdrawal did not mean it had given up. After destroying the Death Knight, I found a stable mark of death mana in its remains. It had maintained a connection with some distant entity, meaning the one behind it likely already knew my strength. Dragon blood, in possession of Hell's roar. I could not see where the enemy was hiding or know what it would send next. I could only mark the clue as the highest possible risk in order that no complete corpse remain anywhere in the mining region. After I returned to the territory, Catherine gave birth to 5 more children, 2 common and 3 elite. The system rewarded 5 points to every attribute and 30 points of fire element mana. At my current level, that increase was already small. Clearly, I could not break through to legendary by accumulating ordinary attributes alone. As I prepared to handle other matters, the system sounded again. Birth of second-generation offspring detected. 2 common tier and 1 elite tier. Reward all attributes plus 0.5 fire element mana plus 1. I had formed no new reproductive bond, so my first thought was that something unusual had happened within the territory. After activating the Dragon SI, I found a newly born litter of hybrid infants in the Kobold settlement. They were predominantly kobold in appearance, but carried the demi-human goblin bloodline. 1 elite infant even possessed faint fire element mana. The father was a mature elite flame goblin, while the mother was an ordinary adult kobold. To increase the population, I had previously arranged pairings between mature blood descendants and compatible followers. Now the first results had finally appeared. The second-generation reward was only a fraction of the direct reward, but its potential quantity was entirely different. I already had more than 100 direct descendants. If they all formed families, both the system's returns and the clan's population would continue growing. The death mark revealed no direction, but became active near Mithril. I had hog seal it inside 3 nested black iron boxes, then carve mana-isolating dwarven runes across the exterior. Every other day, a flame offspring observed it remotely. The mark was a risk, but it might also warn us if the hidden controller made contact again. The Dragoness I could see only events occurring within my own territory. I therefore did not magically know the enemy's identity or plan. I could confirm only 3 things: the foe specialized in mass conversion of the undead, controlled at least 1 advanced knight, and probably had an interest in the mithril. Every other inference remained a possibility in our records and could not justify moving the entire army. The notice about second-generation offspring arrived even more suddenly than the warning. When I followed the Steel Throne's awareness to the kobold living area, the infants were already fighting over food. The elite produced no complete fireball, only a small spray of scorching sparks, but it proved a talent could survive into another generation. I ordered the record-keeping demi-human goblins to create our first bloodline genealogy. Every newborn would be registered with its parents, race, tier, manifested talents, and maturation date. Without those records, close-kin pairings and tangled bloodlines would become a new disaster within several generations. To turn a horde into a true people, the clan needed rules established faster than it reproduced. The numerical reward for the second generation was low, smaller than even one ordinary direct birth, but it cost me none of my time. When dozens or hundreds of litters were born together, the accumulation would never stop. More importantly, population growth would no longer end the moment I died or left. The bloodline registry quickly revealed its first problem: there were too many offspring from the same paternal lines. If pairings remained within small local groups, close-kin problems would inevitably appear after several generations. I divided the different settlements into exchange regions, moved adults according to their genealogies, and required specialist review for dragon-blooded and high-mana individuals. The faster reproduction became, the earlier we needed boundaries. Otherwise, disease and bloodline decline would erase the system's rewards. More importantly, the hybrid offspring retained part of the Dark Goblin's accelerated reproduction and maturation. The Caesar clan was no longer merely an army that I personally kept creating. It was becoming a people capable of continuing on its own. Second-generation reproduction was not as fast as I had first imagined. My direct offspring inherited only part of my talents and could not guarantee success from a single cross-racial pairing. Ordinary bloodlines generally required half a month. Dragon-blooded descendants might require 2 or 3. And a chieftain-tier dragon-blooded pregnancy could last more than half a year. The second generation also matured more slowly than the first. After half a month, only about half of the adult offspring had successfully produced children, and the reward increase was far below expectations. But the plan had already solved our shortage of expendable troops and labor. With stable resources, the population might reach 100,000 within a few years. Over a longer period, the tiny rewards accumulating without pause would also become a power no one could ignore. The problem shifted to food and territory. The current followers consumed vast amounts of supplies every day, and the undeveloped resources nearby could support us only temporarily. As the population continued growing, the Caesar clan would have to control more hunting grounds, mines, and surface entrances. The ogre settlement to the northwest was the nearest target and controlled another tunnel to the surface. Ogres were enormous and suited to frontal combat, but I did not include them in the core bloodline plan. A bloodline's value had to account for controllability, intelligence, and the purpose of its descendants, not strength alone. In the end, I decided to clear out the ogres for 3 reasons: eliminate the strongest independent monsters nearby, seize their stored food, and control a new route to the surface. Through the Steel Throne, I mustered gnolls, lizard folk, and part of my goblin offspring. The ordinary kobolds remained to protect the mines, while the dwarves hurried to alter armor for bodies of different sizes. I had no intention of charging into the ogres myself. They possessed astonishing strength, but little discipline. The best plan was to wear them down with rotating ranks of followers. Then let the flame offspring and dragon descendants make the decisive kills. After half a month of bloodline records, I found that success correlated with similar body sizes, compatible habits, and matching mana attributes. Chasing a particular appearance by force had no value. What truly required selection was each adult's health, intelligence, and usefulness in the clan. Followers who reproduced still worked and trained. The clan could not treat any member as a number alone. The population model was also more complicated than my early optimistic estimate. Infants matured quickly, but still needed meat, occupied cavern space, and required basic training. 100,000 followers meant dozens of tons of food each day, along with far more water, waste disposal, and ventilation. If production did not keep pace, accelerated reproduction would create nothing but famine. I had the kobolds enlarge the fungus caverns and use monster waste and rotting wood to cultivate edible mushrooms. We had not yet found human captives with agricultural knowledge, so farming remained experimental. The gnolls expanded patrols toward the northwest and recorded animal populations rather than killing everything they saw. Stable resources required a cycle, not devouring the surrounding land until it became barren. The ogre settlement became an obstacle we had to remove. Its members often crossed the border to seize prey and hunted followers traveling alone. If I submitted them directly, their enormous appetites and uncontrollable habits might worsen the strain on our food. If I ignored them, neither the new surface passage nor the entire northwestern hunting region would ever be safe. Before the campaign, I had the dwarves complete the first heavy shields and long-hooked spears. Against enemies 10 to 16 feet tall, a short sword could not reach anything vital. Hooked spears could restrain their ankles, while the shields diverted frontal impacts toward the sides. Tactics began with the design of the weapons. Before marching on the ogres, I assigned retreat signals to every squad. 1 short whistle meant rotate the front line, 2 meant a ranged volley, and only one sustained blast ordered the entire army to withdraw. Absolute dominion could prevent my followers from fleeing, but could not guarantee they knew when to leave a fight. True discipline did not mean everyone dying where they stood. It meant preserving the forces capable of continuing the battle even when the pressure was greatest. Once I held the passage, I could investigate the surface more safely and perhaps find the human craftsmen, potion makers, and sources of intelligence the clan truly lacked. More than a dozen adult warriors lived in the ogre camp, standing 10 to 16 feet tall. They were butchering prey around a bonfire, with more than a dozen human prisoners confined nearby. After confirming the situation through the advanced scout's eyes, I launched the attack. Lizardfolk and gnolls charged from both sides. The ogre chief sent a broad section of the front line flying with a single sweep of its club. Under absolute dominion, the followers did not break. They continued rotating and dragged the ogres into a war of attrition. The flame goblins repeatedly attacked their legs and eyes, while dragon descendants in black iron armor cut off their retreat from the sides. By the time the ogre chief was exhausted, every other member of the settlement had fallen. One final concentrated assault ended the battle. The rescued prisoners later told me they had belonged to an escort company that included a baroness' son. The ogres had kept the humans as stored food, and the noblemen had been killed before we arrived. The surviving mercenaries and villagers were willing to work in exchange for their lives. I did not release them at once. The Caesar clan needed people who understood human construction, language, and daily life. For the time being, these captives were placed in an independent area and assigned to improve the territory's facilities. With the ogre settlement gone, no independent monster nearby could directly threaten the Caesar clan. I sent a goblin team through the new entrance, and for the first time, we saw the true surface. The entrance was hidden in a remote cave surrounded by forest and weeds. After searching a short distance farther, the scouts discovered a human village of barely more than 100 people. Its muddy streets had no drainage, and most villagers were thin. A large 3-story residence stood in the center, with a blacksmith shop and tavern nearby. The tavern held ordinary armed adventurers, but no obvious high-level class fighters. The village stood close to the underworld entrance, with few inhabitants in an isolated location. It was ideal for a surface outpost, but I did not want merely to steal its resources and leave ruins behind. The first volley of hooked ropes restrained only 2 ogres. The other enemies smashed the lines apart with their clubs, and the impacts dented even the black iron shields. I spread the front line at once, so one blow could not cause too many casualties. The lizard folk climbed the rock walls to higher positions and threw short spears specifically at the eyes, while the flame offspring burned the backs of the giants' knees and forced them to bend. The ogre chief quickly realized the ordinary followers were bait and turned toward the spellcasting team. The dragon-blooded offspring hidden along its flank released their pressure together, causing it to falter. 3 heavy bolts forged by the dwarves pierced its leg. Only when it dropped to one knee did the gnolls and lizard folk concentrate their attacks on the side of its neck. We still suffered injuries, but no squad was completely broken apart. The human captives did not trust us after their rescue. They had watched one group of monsters kill another and could only assume they had acquired new masters. I first treated their wounds and distributed normal food. Then had Catherine communicate the terms remotely in the human tongue labor in exchange for safety. No one could leave for the time being, and anyone who followed the rules would not become food. The escort company included a carpenter, a coachman, and 2 mercenaries who knew basic stonework. They were assigned to repair ventilation shafts, reinforce the living areas, and teach the demi-human goblins to use human measurements and plans. News of the Baroness' son's death was sealed completely. If any survivor returned to the surface, the local lord's army might arrive immediately. While scouting the human village, I did not let goblins walk into the street. The most human-looking demi-human offspring put on the captive's clothes and observed the daily routine from the forest's edge. Ordinary followers searched the slope for water sources, walls, and escape routes. The village had no true wall, only a wooden fence, and just 4 guards at night. But the difficulty of taking over the village was never defeating the guards. Tax collectors, merchant caravans, church officials, and villagers traveling outside would all carry news to the wider world. If I wanted to use this outpost for years, everything had to look the same when cooking smoke rose the next morning. The captive's surface map was crude, but it showed that the village belonged to a minor lord, that a merchant caravan passed each month, and that taxes were collected in autumn. Silently slaughtering the village would only provoke a faster investigation. I had the scouts record the cooking smoke, bell times, and changes of guard. From the beginning, The takeover plan aimed to keep the village operating, not turn human homes into a new underground camp. The map also marked a church and the dirt road to the Lord's castle. No priest was permanently stationed in the village. Traveling clergy conducted the rites, giving us a window of time. I told the hidden sentries to record the date of the next visit. Every obvious trace of monsters had to be removed from the street before then. If I could control the village while preserving its existing order, it could gather intelligence, trade for supplies, and conceal the underground entrance for the Caesar clan. Taking it over without alerting the surrounding lords would be the most difficult next step. Demi-human and charm goblins looked close to human. By concealing a few racial features, they could infiltrate the village. Their charm abilities could control the village headman, allowing us to take over the established order little by little. I had been preparing to use this low-risk plan when flames suddenly reduced both advanced scouts to ash. Before visual sharing broke, I saw a black-haired woman wearing a witch's hat and carrying a golden staff. After killing the scouts, she entered the village. I sent new hidden sentries to watch from a distance and learned that she was staying in the tavern. The mana around her was immensely concentrated. While her fire carried a chaotic quality reminiscent of demons, she was at least a top-ranked classed fighter. That night, I surrounded the village with more than 100 lizard folk, gnolls, and kobolds. As expected, the woman sensed the mana disturbance and came out alone to stop us. She introduced herself as Mary. From the aura connecting me to the throne and Hell's roar alone, she judged that the true danger in this monster army was not its numbers, but its chief. Do you intend to stop me? I did not attack at once. The village was the bridgehead for my surface plans. If two top-ranked fighters battled among its houses, it would become rubble within minutes. Mary had no desire to endanger the villagers, either. In the end, she followed me to the plain outside the settlement. My followers sealed every road to prevent the adventurers from breaking out while I was occupied. She believed I intended to massacre the village. I told her I wanted territory and a stable population, not pointless corpses. But she refused to let monsters take over a human settlement and raised her staff all the same. The fire elements around her rapidly went out of control. It was not magic an ordinary mage built according to a model, but more like a talent written directly into her blood. Both scouts had worn the marks required for visual sharing before entering the village. The first saw only the golden staff rising before white flame consumed the image. The second fled across the rooftops. But the fire pursued him as if alive for 2 streets and left no corpse behind. The ability to lock onto stealth and fleeing targets at the same time in an unfamiliar environment proved her perception far exceeded that of an ordinary mage. I did not sacrifice more followers to test her. Instead, the hidden sentries outside the village recorded everyone she contacted. After arriving, Mary first treated an injured hunter, then paid for her room with gold and threatened no villager. She killed the goblins because she believed monsters were scouting a human settlement, not because she attacked indiscriminately. That judgment confirmed she would oppose the takeover, but also that she would not use villagers as shields on purpose. We therefore carried out the encirclement late at night. The followers controlled only the forest, roads, and well, entering no private home. The flame offspring remained far from the thatched roofs, so one uncontrolled spell could not destroy the entire outpost. I also prepared wet blankets and firebreak trenches. In a battle involving a top-ranked fire mage, preparation beyond the battlefield might matter more than dozens of additional soldiers. Mary wore no armor when she left the tavern, though the golden staff floated beside her on its own. Her first look went not to the army but to the dragon soul connection between me and the throne. She then ordered me to return underground and promised not to pursue any monsters that withdrew. It was her final ultimatum and the only peaceful outcome she would accept. I could not surrender the new entrants. Nor could I allow a powerful fighter who had seen the size of my army to leave freely. Neither side had room to yield, so we could only move the battlefield outside the village. No civilians stood in the center of the plain, and the ground could endure the impact. But whoever lost control of the fire first would drag the village behind us into disaster. While negotiating with Mary, I kept every follower at the edge of her spell range. If she attacked first, the dispersed formation would reduce our losses. If she remained willing to talk, the army's distance would not force the conflict to begin early. After I explained the rules under which I would take the village, her greatest concern was whether humans would be treated as food. That question confirmed she had seen monsters slaughter a village before and explained why she refused to believe any promise. The battle was unavoidable. Since Mary had chosen to stand in my path, I would also discover exactly what power lay hidden inside her. Mary admitted she was not fully human. Her mother was the daughter of a legendary fire mage, while her father was a Baylor Lord of the Abyss. Neither humans nor demons accepted such a hybrid, so the outside world called her the Witch of Calamity. Fiery markings surfaced across her skin, and curved demonic horns grew from her forehead. Red clouds quickly covered the sky, and a flaming meteor fell toward me. The power had no stable spell structure. It relied on bloodline force to control the elements directly, making it stronger but far more difficult to contain. Through the grimoire of flame, I cast the upper-level spell Roar of the Fire Dragon. A dragon of flame tore the meteor apart in midair, though shattered fire still rained across the area and ignited a wide stretch of grassland. Mary's attention visibly wavered when she saw the spreading fire. That was why they called her a calamity. She tried to protect the weak, yet the collateral damage from her uncontrolled power could exceed that of a monster. She summoned a giant hand of magma, and I blasted it apart with consecutive upper-level spells. After absorbing steel dragon blood and accumulating a large number of second-generation rewards, my mana had approached that of a top-ranked mage. With the grimoire of flame, I could cast more than 10 upper-level spells in succession. Under my pressure, Mary completed her final transformation. Her human body grew to more than 16 feet tall, her skin became rock, and magma flowed through its cracks. She had assumed the true form of a Baylor. Baylors of the Abyss possessed an innate command of fire, and a powerful lord could even approach the gods. Mary's hybrid form had not reached that level, but it surpassed an ordinary top-ranked classed fighter and stood one step below legendary. She told me this was the first time she had completely released her demonic bloodline. If she maintained the form, the Baylor's will would gradually consume her human reason. I put away the grimoire of flame and transformed. When the first meteor fell, the moisture in the air evaporated instantly. Roar of the Fire Dragon shattered it above us. Rather than allow the pieces to scatter, I sent the flaming dragon spiraling around them and swept most of the residual fire toward an open area without trees. Several fragments still escaped my control, and the fire breaks we had dug in advance finally served their purpose. Mary did not excel at precise spellcasting. Every attack was like opening the furnace inside her body. The power reached the top rank, but constantly leaked at the edges. The grimoire of flame, by comparison, provided fixed models, letting me control direction, range, and detonation time with the same mana. She possessed the more ferocious fire. I possessed the more stable battlefield. After 5 consecutive exchanges, the ground had become flowing glass. She sealed my retreat with a giant magma hand, then detonated pillars of fire from below. I rose on steel dragon wings and used a stream of pressurized flame to sever the hand at the wrist. Fire could not truly injure Baylor blood, but it could disrupt the mana structure sustaining her form. Mary grew more frantic as the fight continued because the village remained visible in the distance. When she tried to narrow her spells, their power fell noticeably. When she saw me approach, her instincts released a larger sea of fire. Her desire to protect others and her demonic impulses were in constant conflict, pushing her toward a complete Baylor transformation. When her 16-foot body appeared, her mana suddenly crossed the limit of the top rank. Her stone skin devoured ordinary flame, and each drop of molten blood created a new fire where it struck the ground. I might win by continuing the magical exchange, but the entire plane would burn for days. I put away the grimoire, ordered my followers to retreat another third of a mile, and decided to use my transformed speed to shatter her core. The followers along the perimeter continued fighting the wildfire. Kobolds carried water from the village well in wooden barrels. Lizard folk flattened burning grass to create fire breaks. The flame offspring used elemental perception to locate underground embers. Every escalation between the two of us increased the pressure behind the lines. If I focused only on defeating Mary and gained a wasteland of ash, the entire surface plan would still be a failure. Mary deliberately directed every attack away from the village, making her casting patterns gradually predictable. I drove her movements toward open rock, forcing her either to reduce her power or cast flame into lifeless ground. Controlling the battlefield was not an extra act of kindness. It was another attack aimed at her psychological weakness. Against someone one step below legendary, continuing to exchange spells would only spread the fire. I had to end the battle more directly. Mary's fiery breath swept across the plain and swallowed me completely. When the heat passed, the steel dragon scales bore only a few scorch marks. Dark carapace and the damage reduction from my transformed state had blocked most of the attack. Her power approached legendary, but she had not completed the true crossing. Below legendary, a battle still depended on attributes: mana, and technique, and I held the advantage in all three. I shattered the ground beneath my foot and accelerated, breaking one baler arm with a punch. Mary swung the other down. I caught it with one hand and hurled her 16-foot body away. Her size and fire appeared overwhelming, but her movements could not match my speed. We were never on the same level. I leaped onto the baler's head and told her the village would not be massacred. It would only receive a new ruler. She tried to gather fire for another attack, so I shattered the baler core. The enormous body lost its power and scattered into ash. Mary returned to human form and fell unconscious. I carried her back to the monster ranks, then walked toward the village entrance, where the defenders had entered a state of total alert, submit or perish. Several adventurers refused to negotiate. The first arrow flew directly at my eye, only to shatter against my eyelid. I crossed the defensive line and killed their leader on the spot, forcing the others to understand the difference between us. I had intended to take the settlement through infiltration, but Mary's appearance made secrecy impossible. Now that everyone had seen the monster army, I could only end the resistance through force, then earn obedience through the order I established afterward. The village headmen and the remaining adventurers lowered their weapons. My followers entered the settlement under strict orders not to loot, kill, or damage any home. The baler's breath covered hundreds of yards, leaving no direction that offered complete escape. I folded my wings to protect my head. Dark carapace absorbed the first impact. Steel dragon scales dispersed more of the heat, and my fire element mana weakened the final temperature even before I possessed the baler's power. My skin still burned after all three defenses, but my body had not lost the ability to move. When Mary saw me emerge from the fire, hesitation appeared for the first time. She had always ended battles through overwhelming bloodline power and rarely met an enemy who could withstand her breath directly. In that instant, I had already closed the entire distance. She raised an arm to block me, but the elbow bent backward under my fist, spraying magma from the fracture. The larger the baler became, the more slowly it turned. I moved through her blind spots, striking the knees, wing roots, and the mana convergence point in her chest. When she tried to drive me away with fire across her entire body, I used my dragon wings to rise briefly and denied her every chance to gather full power. Before shattering the core, I told her again that the village would not be slaughtered. Mary did not believe me. She compressed all her remaining power into the core and prepared to take me with her. I used Hell's Roar to split the outer stone armor, then suppressed the eruption with dark divine power. As the fire contracted, her human body fell from the ash. The adventurers at the village entrance still chose resistance. After the leading archer died, I had my followers confiscate the others' weapons. We did not pursue villagers who fled into their homes, nor did I permit looting in the name of victory. Only when the headman saw the monsters truly stop along both sides of the street did he accept registration and temporary submission. Fear opened the gate order would have to prove itself beginning the next day. After the village surrendered, I sent every family home and delayed household registration until morning, preventing a nighttime crowd from causing a stampede. The wounded adventurers received basic treatment. While their companion was allowed to bury the man who had led the attack, force required a clear boundary. Those who attacked would die, those who stopped resisting could live. Predictable consequences made a strange population more likely to obey than random terror. Fear could take a village in one night, but it could not sustain production. Next, I had to prove that ordinary villagers would at least live better under the new rule than under the old lord. We registered the villagers, headmen, and adventurers together. Humans and monsters had been enemies for centuries. They could not accept me after one command. I did not demand trust. I first restored food distribution and security after dark. The village mattered because of its location, not its population. It could conceal the underground entrance and prevent unfamiliar adventurers from going straight into the depths. It could also serve as the Caesar clan's outpost for trade routes, money, and surface intelligence. I planned to expand the settlement of more than 100 people into a town while securing the second entrance in the former ogre territory. The passage could not be sealed completely because the underground clan needed to exchange technology and talent with the surface, but everyone who entered would first pass through an outpost under my control. My longer-term goal was to let different races live under one order. Force could establish rule only at the beginning. Food, housing, safety, and taxes would ultimately decide the villagers' attitude. If their lives improved beyond what the previous lord provided, practical interests would at least gradually replace racial hatred. I brought Mary underground and confined her alone with mithril chains. She could unleash power one step below legendary, which ordinary black iron could never restrain. Mithril absorbed elements and weakened her Baylor transformation. When Mary awoke, she immediately ignited a weak flame and examined her surroundings. Once she discovered that her power could not pass through the chains, she stopped wasting mana. I entered the cell and told her plainly that the village still stood and its people had not been slaughtered. But she had lost the battle and now had to accept the status of a prisoner. She did not believe my promise and refused to pledge allegiance. I would not remove the restraints from someone this powerful whom I could not immediately control. The village registry had 3 parts population and occupations, land and food, and connections with the outside world. Blacksmiths, carpenters, hunters, and literate people received special marks, while we recorded the tax collector's visits and caravan routes. Without that information, the takeover would be nothing but a brief occupation. I kept the headman in his position so he could continue resolving disputes and handling daily distribution. A demi-human goblin capable of assuming human form stood beside him as an observer. I did not replace every night guard, either, but put dragon-blooded offspring in control of the armory. Familiar faces remained, reducing the villagers' panic at the sudden change in order. The outside of the underground entrance was disguised as an abandoned mine, with 2 sealable stone doors farther inside. Followers traveling to the surface had to pass through a separate cleaning area, so conspicuous tracks, scents, and subterranean parasites would not reveal the route. Villagers could not approach the entrance without permission. Violators would first be confined and questioned rather than executed immediately. Mary's cell stood near the mithril mine, but away from its main tunnels. Chains secured her wrists, ankles, and mana convergence points. Their length allowed her to eat and rest, but not complete the movements for a large spell. 2 guard teams always remained outside. If mental or fire magic affected one, the other would seal the door and sound the alarm. I made the conditions for cooperation specific. If she stopped destroying things, she received food, books, and news from the village. Verifiable intelligence could reduce the restraints. Another attack powerful enough to harm the guards would result in tighter mithril bindings. She could refuse allegiance, but she could not use her power freely inside my territory. Mary received 1 village report each day, including casualties, food stocks, and whether anyone had been punished. I did not allow her to contact the villagers directly, but ensured outside facts could verify the information. If she learned the village had truly survived, she might at least stop destroying herself over an imagined worst outcome. The first step toward cooperation was not loyalty, but both sides recognizing that reality had not followed their greatest fears. The next step was not repeated humiliation, but making her accept 3 facts she could not escape. Further rampages would only injure her, and cooperation would earn greater freedom of movement. The first time Mary tried to break the mithril chains, they absorbed the Baylor's power in reverse. The elemental backlash gravely injured her. Her demonic bloodline quickly repaired the damage, but she still refused to bow her head. I used coercive punishment to make her stop attacking the cell without end. The process was brutal, but the narration did not dwell on systematic humiliation. In the end, she conserved her strength and accepted temporary imprisonment. Though she still refused to promise loyalty, I did not mistake this truce for obedience. Mary was an independent fighter 1 step below legendary. Only interests, restraints, and superior strength could keep her in the Caesar clan for long. After dealing with the cell, I returned my attention to the human village. An inventory showed that the existing food could last at most a month and a half, while the next harvest was 2 or 3 months away. 2/3 of the villagers' crops had previously gone to the nobility. Part of the remainder had to be reserved as seed, forcing many people to fill their stomachs with hard-to-digest black fruit. I first had the underground followers deliver meat from large monsters to prevent an immediate famine. Then I drew the structure of an iron plow from memory and gave the design to the bronzebeard dwarves. Compared with primitive digging tools, an iron plow could increase both planting efficiency and the survival rate of crops. Fertilizer came from the organic waste the village and underground territory had accumulated over many years. It had once polluted the streets. After centralized composting, it could return to the fields. The infrastructure was equally poor. The roads were muddy, the homes crude, and the rainy season could cut off all travel. I repeatedly tested proportions of lime, clay, and gravel from memory, finally producing a simple cement that would set. With iron plows, fertilizer, and cement, the village had the means to improve its agriculture and roads for the first time. Mary tried twice in succession to melt the chains. Mithril did more than absorb flame. It sent forcefully compressed elements back into the body through each point of connection. The first attempt burned her arm. The second cracked her Baylor core. Demonic regeneration could repair outward wounds, but it could not negate such internal backlash forever. I forcibly stopped the third attempt and limited the punishment to pain and restricted movement, without describing further humiliation. Only after she stopped attacking did the healers enter the cell. If a rule became nothing but torment, a prisoner would destroy herself simply to end the pain. My objective was to keep a near-legendary fighter alive and under restraint. The food problem on the surface was more urgent. Some grain in the village warehouse had molded, and much of it had been mixed with sand. The truly edible portion was smaller than the account books claimed. I canceled advanced collection, distributed dried underground meat according to the number of laborers in each household, and preserved enough seed. Those unable to work still received a minimum ration, so the old and young would not become the first sacrifices of the new order. The Bronzebeard dwarves revised the iron plow prototype 3 times. The first was too heavy for humans to push for long. The second had too steep a point and jammed among stones. The third used a curved iron blade and animal traction, finally increasing the speed of turning the soil. Memories from my previous life could provide direction, but local craftsmen still had to test every practical design. The simple cement did not work on the first attempt, either. Too much lime caused cracks, while too much soil made it soften in water. I had the villagers pour more than a dozen test slabs in an open area. Only after drying them in the sun, soaking them in water, and crushing them under heavy loads did we select the most stable formula. The first batch repaired the well platform and drainage ditches, not elaborate houses. The agricultural experiment used control fields. One plot followed the old method. One received only fertilizer, one used the iron plow, and the last combined both improvements. Without controls, a larger harvest might come from the weather alone, and we would never know which investment was effective. I did not understand complete agricultural science, but I knew we had to record every trial. Rule could not depend forever on scattered memories from my former life. An accidental success had to become a procedure anyone could repeat. I could not create food from nothing, but I could make resources previously wasted produce real results. If the villagers no longer starved under the new order, they would gradually care less about their ruler's race. Large patches of sweet fruit grew outside the village. The villagers said it tasted delicious but spoiled quickly and could not truly satisfy hunger. After tasting one, I recognized it as a fruit much like a grape. Grain was too valuable to turn into alcohol, but the sweet fruit was not. Even ordinary alcohol was a luxury in this world. If we could produce wine reliably, the profit would be enough to finance the village's expansion. I had the villagers harvest ripe fruit and establish a small fermentation trial while planning kills for bricks, glass, and ceramics. Cement, brick, tile, and glass would improve construction. Wine and refined vessels could be exchanged for gold and outside supplies. A system notice also arrived from the underground territory. Isabel's second birth produced 3 leader tier and 2 chieftain tier dragon-blooded offspring. Reward all attributes plus 261 chieftain tier talent scroll. After using the scroll, I acquired the chieftain tier demonic talent Deep Metamorphosis. The ability could alter my bloodline, size, appearance, and aura while simulating some talents of a target race. It could also change a weapon's shape or disguise the appearance of magic. But it could not turn me into a creature whose power differed too greatly from my own, nor could it change the true nature of an attack. I assumed the human appearance from my previous life. My bloodline aura and physical structure were indistinguishable from those of a real human. Hell's roar changed into a long saber while retaining every property of the legendary weapon. As I tested the ability, the dragoness, I detected 6 human-classed fighters near the former ogre territory. They had clearly come to track the missing travelers, and every one was stronger than an ordinary adventurer. Sending followers into battle might expose the Caesar clan. Looking at my flawless human appearance, I decided to make contact personally. The first batches of sweet fruit fermentation soured badly. I had the wooden barrels cleaned with boiling water, separated fruit of different ripeness, and controlled the sugar and temperature. The third batch finally retained the fruit aroma and produced a stable amount of alcohol. It was still far from a fine wine, but already better than the cheap, watered-down ale in the village. We could not produce unlimited alcohol while food remained scarce. I kept the experiment small and dried part of the ripe fruit for storage. Brick kilns and pottery served daily life, first by producing drainage pipes, grain jars, and heat-resistant furnace bricks. Glass required higher temperatures, so the dwarves began testing it in underground furnaces. Only after success would we consider windows or trade goods. When Isabel's second group of children was born, their draconic pressure was steadier than the first. The two chieftain-tier infants could already make nearby iron objects float slightly. Repeated high-tier offspring proved the source of her bloodline was far stronger than its outward concentration suggested and showed the first birth had not been a coincidence. The System S enhancement of 260 points made my normal physique cross another obvious threshold. I tested deep metamorphosis in 3 categories: appearance, aura, and combat. I could shrink my dragon horns, scales, and body, simulate a human heartbeat and temperature, and turn Hell's roar into a long saber. But if I was wounded and lost control of my power, my true bloodline could briefly appear. The disguise was not absolute. The more intense the battle, the easier it became to expose. I also tried simulating the auras of dwarves and ordinary adventurers. Unless I came into direct contact with a god or legendary detection, the surface disguise was almost impossible to distinguish. At that exact moment, 6 powerful figures entered the edge of the dragon's eye. My new ability immediately found the most dangerous possible test. Deep metamorphosis could not copy complete memories. Even after assuming a human appearance, I still had to learn the local manners, currency, and accent, or one sentence could expose me. The human captives corrected forms of address. Catherine provided noble etiquette, and the headman explained ordinary trading customs. Appearance was merely a ticket through the door. Passing a real inspection depended on details collected over time. The first real-world use of deep metamorphosis was not a frontal battle, but infiltrating a powerful party with unknown objectives. The dragoness, I continued tracking the 6 intruders. From their equipment, emblems, and forms of address, I determined that the party consisted of a holy priestess from the Radiant Church, a dwarf warrior, an Imperial Knight Commander, a water mage, a half-elf archer, and an assassin from the Shadow Church. For had reached the top rank, while the other 2 approached the legendary sequence. Such a force could sweep away a great ogre clan and had not been assembled temporarily for an ordinary bounty. The most striking member was the holy priestess Tinus. She wore a veil and radiated pure divine magic, yet the other members unconsciously turned their eyes toward her. It was not an active spell, but a natural allure she seemed unable to disable. Horton, the Knight Commander, remained vigilant and warned the party several times that the region was too quiet. The assassin clearly lacked restraint, prompting an argument with the dwarf warrior. The party possessed immense combat power, but its internal trust was unstable. I first cleared a low-level monster camp ahead of them, then used deep metamorphosis to disguise myself as a human warrior. Creating wounds and an aura of exhaustion from a recent battle, I sat against the wall beside a passage they had to use. The 6 stopped as soon as they found me. Horton did not approach recklessly. He sent the archer to examine the surroundings. But after Tinus confirmed that I still showed signs of life, she stepped away from the formation. I maintained a guarded posture and deliberately let them see my weapon and injuries. Too much friendliness would look like a trap. A measured wariness suited a lone adventurer better. Before Tinus' healing light descended, I confirmed every party member's position once more. Their formation revealed their roles. Horton stood in front, his shield and longsword both bearing imperial emblems. The half-elf archer always remained 24 feet from the party, watching the cavern roof. Bartley used water magic to read vibrations in every puddle they passed. The assassin vanished and reappeared at the rear. In a direct engagement, they could counter an ambush, ranged attacks, and group magic at the same time. Tina stood at the center. Though her staff never pointed toward a companion, it continuously provided the entire party with a faint divine barrier. The dwarf warrior Lomp wore armor scarred by many old wounds, showing he absorbed the most dangerous impacts. For top-ranked fighters, and 2 near legendaries covered one another's weaknesses. Their only true vulnerability was the distrust of a temporary alliance. The low-level monster camp I chose stood near the main passage. The corpses and fire marks proved a battle had just occurred. The wounds created by my transformation did not actually sever bone, they only simulated blood loss and mana exhaustion. A genuine expert would examine whether injuries matched the story, so I used Hell's Roar to leave similar saber marks on the rock and arranged several monster corpses as though they had killed one another. When Horton found me, he checked the retreat first, then demanded the name of my mercenary company. I gave him the name of a small guild I had heard from the human captives and claimed that my companions had become separated while chasing a mutated monster. He did not believe me immediately, but found no obvious contradiction. As Tinus drew closer, her passive allure made even the surrounding mana feel gentle. Dark divine power protected my mind, but I deliberately showed the momentary daze expected of an ordinary man. Complete immunity would have created suspicion. When she raised her staff, The party's healing core had willingly entered my attack range. As Tinas healed me, I noticed Horton never removed his hand from his sword, and the half-elf kept her arrow aimed. The kindness belonged to Tinas alone. It did not mean the party had relaxed. If I attacked now, I might control the priestess, but the other 5 would focus their fire on me. I therefore maintained the role of an injured man and limited my first contact to gathering intelligence and confirming whether divine magic could penetrate the transformation. When holy light passed through my body, I deliberately slowed my breathing and let dark divine power protect only my core rather than collide with the spell directly. If the two forces erupted inside me, Horton would see the abnormality without any detection spell. The key to a disguise was not showing no reaction, but keeping every reaction within the range expected of an injured human. If I deceived them peacefully, I would not have to face all 6 powerful fighters at once. If they discovered my followers nearby and decided on extermination, not one of them could leave the underworld. Ignoring Horton's objection, Tinas cast a divine healing spell on me. The power approached the near-legendary level and truly repaired the wounds made by deep metamorphosis. She told me not to be afraid because they would not harm another human. I thanked her and exchanged a small amount of intelligence under the pretext of searching for my missing friends. Every other party member kept a distance. Horton was especially vigilant. His instincts clearly warned him that something was wrong with my identity. At close range, I discovered that Tinas's unnatural allure could even influence my judgment slightly. It did not resemble a succubus's mental attack, but a passive bloodline or divine effect. A priestess with near-legendary healing power and a special talent was immensely valuable to the system, but I still did not decide to attack immediately. All 6 possessed hidden cards. Even if I won, someone might escape. Once the surface powers learned that a near-legendary monster had appeared along the outskirts, neither humans nor the churches would continue ignoring the region. I originally planned to memorize Tinas's aura and act against her alone after the party left the underworld. Then the water mage used a detection spell and found signs of extensive monster activity nearby. He proposed clearing the area on their return journey, and none of the others objected. Those traces came from my followers. If I allowed the investigation to continue, the connection between the former ogre territory and the Caesar clan would eventually be exposed. Letting them pass peacefully was no longer safe. I reassessed the battlefield quickly. Facing all 6 head-on carried enormous risk, but their internal relationships offered an opening. They belonged to different organizations, had joined only for this mission, and did not completely trust one another. The underground tunnels also had countless forks, making them easy to divide. Since they had willingly selected the Caesar clan as an extermination target, I could only strike first. As the divine healing passed through deep metamorphosis, I prepared to counterattack at once. The radiant power did not strip away the disguise. It treated the deliberately created wounds as real and repaired them. That proved the transformation temporarily restructured flesh and aura rather than changing only the surface. But when divine magic approached my core, dark power still produced a faint rejection I had to suppress. During our conversation, I learned that they had spent several days underground, searching for signs of some large creature without revealing its identity. Horton interrupted several questions, clearly unwilling to let a strange adventurer know their mission. I did not press him. I merely described ogre activity ahead, giving myself a reason to remain near their route. Tinas was willing to heal a stranger. Lomp thought I would slow the party, while the assassin even proposed searching me. Horton eventually allowed me to leave on my own, but forbade me to follow them. That decision originally suited me perfectly. I could memorize their auras and investigate once they were far from my territory. Bartley's detection spell revealed fresh claw marks, hauling trails, and residual fire elements along the rock walls. He estimated that at least 1,000 monsters lived nearby and argued that clearing them would prevent an attack during the return journey. Though Horton prioritized their mission, he agreed to mark the route and send a force later. Later would expose the clan just as surely. The assassin had already begun following the tracks and could find the old ogre camp within half a day. I could not gamble that they would forget after completing their mission. While the party still believed me human, I had to exploit their divisions and dismantle their complete battle formation into separate targets. After deciding to hunt them, I first closed every fork that might lead toward the human village and directed the battlefield into an abandoned low-level monster region. It contained no nursery, miners, or prisoners. Even if near-legendary magic destroyed the passages, the loss would be only empty caverns. I could no longer choose whether war occurred, but I could still choose who paid the environmental cost. This time, I needed neither an army nor high-tier magic. wearing the identity of the human warrior they had just saved. I would remain near the party and reduce its strength one member at a time. As the party prepared to continue, I claimed my friends were still ahead and walked past them. The instant we passed one another, I stabbed the dwarf warrior with my transformed saber, then used the force of Horton's counterattack to retreat into the darkness. The assassin believed I might possess useful underground intelligence and pursued me alone. 10 minutes later, I killed him and used deep metamorphosis to copy his appearance, aura, bloodline, and equipment, then returned to the party in his identity. Tinas had already healed the dwarf's wound. When Horton asked for the result, I showed him a blood-stained dagger and claimed the injured target had escaped. He remained suspicious, but had no evidence to see through me. When we reached a fork, Horton decided to explore in pairs. I went with Bartley, the water mage, once we were far from the others. Bartley used magic to clear a low-level monster camp and focused entirely on the path ahead. I ambushed him from behind, but his top-rank protective equipment automatically raised a shield and blocked the first strike. Bartley immediately cast Water Barrier and triggered an Ice Burst scroll, raising his combat power through staff and equipment to nearly the legendary threshold. I restored part of Hell's Roar's true strength. One gale slash tore through the ice shards and walls of water. I finished the battle, then burned the body to leave no soul trace that could be followed. After returning to the rendezvous, I claimed a monster had lured Bartley away and that he was gone when I came back. Horton finally realized something was wrong. A near-legendary mage could not vanish without a sound. Only the companion beside him could have made him lower his guard. I tried to ambush the half-elf archer, but Horton intercepted the attack. With my identity exposed, I did not become entangled in battle. I used the terrain to retreat into the darkness. The six-person party had lost its assassin and water mage. Only Horton, the dwarf, the archer, and Tinas remained. Their numbers had fallen, but their vigilance reached its peak. The angle of the strike against Lomp had been calculated. I avoided the artery and made the wound merely conspicuous enough to force Tinas to remain and heal him. Horton had to protect the priestess and the ranged fighter, making the assassin accustomed to acting alone, the most likely pursuer. As expected, the man did not wait for orders before slipping into the side passage through the shadows. The assassin erased his aura and was almost impossible to locate through ordinary vision. I deliberately left an intermittent trail of blood, drew him into the region most clearly covered by the dragon's eye, then lit the dust along the floor with fire. The instant his footprints appeared, Hell's roar sealed his retreat. Deep metamorphosis then copied his height, voice, shadow aura, and equipment one detail at a time, including his habitual left-handed movements. When I returned, Horton asked 3 questions only a party member would know. I had overheard the answers to the first 2 in earlier arguments. The third concerned a church code, so I redirected the conversation to the wounded target's escape. The assassin was arrogant and taciturn. My impatience matched the way his companions expected him to behave. After I paired with Bartley, I first observed his automatic defense. A transparent film of water repelled 2 low-level monster ambushes, proving a direct assassination would fail. I let him cast repeatedly to clear the camp, then attacked from behind only after the shield had fallen to half power. The Ice Burst scroll shattered the passage, but the webs and thick layers of rock I had prepared muffled the explosion. When my identity was exposed, Horton did not rush after me. He immediately placed the surviving party members with their backs against the rock wall. The same method would not work twice. I retreated into a marked fork and abandoned another direct assault. 2 core fighters had disappeared. Rather than attack 4 people at maximum alert, I had to make them believe escape remained possible. While disposing of Bartley's body, I took his map, staff, and automatic defense core, then burned the ordinary accessories where they lay. Carrying too many personal items increased the risk of recognition, but taking no spoils at all would not suit the assassin's habits. Before returning, I kept only a blood-dripping dagger and deliberately smeared ice crystals across my clothes. An imperfect detail often made a disguise believable. From that moment, the infiltration phase was over. The true underground hunt had only begun. After my identity was exposed, I deliberately taunted the dwarf warrior Lomp into a rage. As expected, he chased me alone into a narrow tunnel, while Horton stayed behind to protect the archer and priestess. Once we were far from the party, I returned to dragon form, crushed Lomp's warhammer with one hand, and ended the battle swiftly. I then copied his appearance and aura through deep metamorphosis and changed Hell's roar into an identical heavy hammer. I returned in Lomp's identity and feigned the fury of a failed pursuit. Horton rebuked me, but did not immediately recognize the imposture. When the party encountered another monster camp, he led the charge, while the half-elf archer drew her bow from the rear. I struck the archer from behind, fully exposing my disguise. Horton immediately ordered Tinas to flee and remained behind to stop me. As a knight commander of the Wisteria Empire, he had reached the near-legendary level, and his sword aura could split an entire stretch of tunnel. But after I grasped part of the Law of Fire, anyone below legendary found it difficult to threaten me truly. I crushed the cross-shaped sword aura and ended the battle before he could react. Then took Horton's appearance and pursued Tinas. She saw a familiar companion guarding the exit, assumed Horton had won, and approached willingly. I seized the opportunity to restrain her and brought her back to the underground territory. Only after Tinas awakened in her bonds did I release the transformation and show her my true goblin form. The entire 6-person party had now been destroyed, with only Tinas preserved. Her healing ability, strange allure, and church identity all deserved further investigation. I had deliberately left half a cloak and several taunts in the main tunnel. Lomp had only just been stabbed and had personally witnessed Bartley's disappearance, allowing anger to overcome his discipline. He continued shouting to his companions after charging into the fork, but the curved rock walls completely blocked the sound. By the time Horton realized something was wrong, the battle had already ended. Lomp's warhammer had been forged by mountain dwarves and bore armor-breaking runes on its face. After transforming, I caught the shaft in one palm and snapped the metal at its midpoint. The absolute difference in strength shattered his judgment and let me draw close enough to copy him. In dwarf form, I deliberately preserved the damage to his shoulder armor and the wound that had just been healed so my appearance would not be suspiciously perfect. The archer did not immediately fall after the ambush. She rolled behind a stone pillar and fired 3 enchanted arrows in succession. The first marked my aura, the second sealed my retreat, and only the third aimed for my eye. I restored part of my dragon scales to block them, then used Hell's Roar in warhammer form to shatter the pillar. Once deprived of an open line of fire, she could not use her ranged advantage. Horton's decision proved him a capable commander. He did not try to save everyone. He sent Tinas away with the mission intelligence, then used imperial swordsmanship to block the entire passage himself. His cross-shaped sword aura approached the legendary threshold, peeling whole sheets of rock from the walls in its wake. I used the Law of Fire to alter the surrounding temperature and destabilize the mana structure inside the attack, then shattered it completely with my blade. When I caught up to Tinas in Horton's form, I did not hurry closer. First, I shouted the escape route in his voice, then showed her the torn cloak and wounds left by the cross-shaped sword aura. Desperate for good news, after losing her companions one after another, Tinas approached. Only when the restraints fell did she notice there was no knightly emblem on the sword hilt. The last thing she saw was a familiar face changing back into silver-gray dragon scales. After the party's destruction, I did not distribute the equipment at once. Imperial emblems, church relics, and soulbound items went into mithril boxes to prevent remote tracking. Only weapons whose marks could safely be removed were given to the dwarves for study. Catherine translated Horton's sealed orders and confirmed that the Silver Dragon mission involved the Imperial family. The more valuable the gains from a victory, the more dangerous the people who would search for them. But the disappearance of 4 top-ranked classed fighters and 2 near-legendaries would never go unquestioned forever. Before the outside world found this party, I had to uncover the true purpose of its mission underground. I interrogated Tinas and asked why such a powerful party had entered the outskirts. She soon confessed that an adult silver dragon had taken a princess of the Wisteria Empire, and an imperial sword saint had gravely wounded the dragon. Someone later cited traces of the silver dragon nearby, and the emperor commissioned them to find the princess. A healthy adult silver dragon was at least a legendary creature, giving the 6 no chance of victory. But if the wounds left by the sword saint were continuing to weaken it, the dragon might possess only near-legendary strength. Silver dragons were usually friendly toward humans. Abducting a princess did not match their common behavior, so an undisclosed cause clearly lay behind the incident. Whatever the truth, a wounded dragon and an imperial princess appearing nearby were both critical targets that could transform the clan's strength and surface relations. During the interrogation, I removed the black veil Tinas had always worn. The system immediately issued a warning. You are being affected by the divine power of the god of corrupt desire. Dark divine power has taken effect. Outside influence neutralized. Tinas was a devout follower of the radiant god, yet she carried the power of the god of corrupt desire. The evil deity was also called the spider god and mother of corrupt desire. Its It specialized in magnifying desire and twisting the will. Legend claimed it had once seduced an elven empress into corruption, leading to the birth of the Drow branch of elves. That explained the allure Tinas could not disable and suggested she had become involved in a conflict between two gods. She herself seemed unaware of the divine power's source and could do nothing but pray repeatedly to the radiant god in her fear. I did not reveal a secret whose answer even I did not know. I merely classified the information as high risk. Divine power made Tinas far more valuable than an ordinary priestess, but it also meant she could become a beacon that let the outside world locate the Caesar clan. Tinas's testimony matched the party's equipment. Horton had carried a sealed imperial order. Bartley's map circled 3 possible silver dragon lairs. The half-elf's quiver contained a drug specifically designed to paralyze large creatures. Their objective truly was to search, not conduct an open hunt. If the princess lived, rescuing her had to remain the first priority. The silver dragon's abduction of the princess remained highly unusual. Metallic dragons generally honored good-aligned covenants. Unless another power was hunting the princess or the Empire had concealed a conflict between them. The Sword Saint's failure to rescue her after wounding the dragon also suggested a third circumstance on the battlefield. Until I met the people involved, I recorded every conclusion as a hypothesis. The moment I removed the veil, the attraction surrounding Tinas intensified. 2 followers guarding the cell lost focus. So I withdrew them at once and restored the isolation with mithril and black cloth. The influence did not come from a spell she actively cast, and the guard's reaction frightened Tinas herself. As dark divine power neutralized the foreign corruption, I briefly saw web-like lines of divine energy extending from the depths of her soul. Her radiant magic had not disappeared. The 2 opposing powers seemed to have been forced into the same vessel. Whenever she prayed, holy light suppressed the web but could not uproot it. I made no attempt to touch the source of the divine power directly. Damaging a god-level mark might let the caster locate us in return, or it might cost Tinas her life. For now, the safest response was isolation, records of every fluctuation, and a ban on any follower looking directly at her for long. The guard log for Tinas added 3 categories: divine power fluctuations, sleep, and prayer. Whenever she prayed continuously, the radiant aura strengthened, but the web-like mark tightened as well, as though resisting purification. If the 2 powers continued pulling against one another, she might collapse first. I ordered the healers to treat only physical injuries and leave the soul untouched. Containing the unknown risk inside the cell, I sealed the black veil separately and found that its alluring effect weakened away from Tinas but did not vanish completely. That suggested the veil was a suppressor rather than the curse's source. Destroying it recklessly might release the divine power. The safest choice remained letting her wear it as before and limiting the duration of every contact. Until we learned the truth, she had to remain in the mithril cell without direct contact with the other followers. I mobilized the entire Caesar clan to search for the silver dragon. Monstrous followers and adult offspring spread outward from the territory, focusing on hidden caverns, sealed rock walls, and water sources. While I waited for the search results, Catherine gave birth to another group of children. 4 common tier offspring and 1 chieftain tier offspring. Reward all attributes plus 100 fire element mana plus 1000. Bonus reward fire affinity plus 1. The chieftain tier infant looked more human and had burning markings covering his skin. His bloodline visibly suppressed his ordinary siblings. Catherine had begun as only a novice mage, but after absorbing magical herbs and divine power for so long, she had finally born her first chieftain tier descendant. She then asked to return to the imperial capital and visit her parents. In the past, she had wanted only to escape. Now she made no attempt to leave on her own and came to ask for my decision. I could not treat that behavior alone as proof of complete loyalty, but the dark imprint's long-term influence on her was clearly deepening. I agreed to arrange a visit home after the current crisis ended and made it clear that she would not travel alone. Catherine accepted the condition. I then tested the fire affinity. The power and range of an ordinary fireball rose by roughly 10%, while its mana cost fell. Affinity did not increase my total mana. It improved the efficiency of the response between me and the fire element. 1 point alone had a clear effect. If the affinity continued accumulating, even lower-level spells might reach middle or upper-level power. Compared with ordinary attributes, elemental affinity offered growth closer to breaking the limits of the laws themselves. We divided the Silver Dragon's search into squares across the territorial map. Kobolds handled narrow cracks. Lizard folk followed waterways and high-temperature regions, Gnolls investigated places where prey had vanished abnormally, and the dragon-blooded offspring searched for the aura of their own kind. Every team had to return and leave its mark on schedule. If one lost contact, no other group could pursue blindly. Even seriously wounded, an adult dragon could destroy an ordinary team with one breath. The scouts therefore had only 3 orders: retreat immediately upon finding silver scales, unusual cold, or enormous tracks. Do not contact the princess and do not attempt to remove any sword. Our first objective was to locate the target, not spend followers' lives testing whether a legendary creature could still fight. When Catherine's chieftain tier child was born, every torch in the room leaned toward him. The infant cast no spell, yet fire elements gathered willingly around the markings on his skin. Such affinity was rarer than a simple reserve of mana and explained why the system listed it as a separate reward. In testing, I cast 10 fireballs with the same amount of mana and recorded the distance, blast radius, and consumption. After the increase in affinity, their average range grew by roughly 1/10, and the time needed to form them shortened noticeably. More importantly, fire elements in the surroundings voluntarily replaced some of the expenditure, reducing the interval between consecutive spells. I did not regard Catherine's request to return to the capital as proof of loyalty. She might miss her parents, or she might seek help. The conditions for a visit included the end of the crisis, companions of my choosing, a route that did not expose the underground entrance, and confirmation of the soul artifact holder's attitudes. A promise did not mean removing every safeguard. It created a controllable path for future contact with the human nobility. After the affinity test, I gave the chieftain tier infant low-intensity training as well. He could draw flames without an incantation but could not reliably choose their direction. Catherine began by teaching him to extinguish them, not to make a larger fireball. For a child born with great power, the first lesson had to be how to stop. Otherwise, higher talent would only make one emotional outburst more destructive. The only known way to gain more affinity remained the birth of offspring with exceptional fire bloodlines. Under unified planning with cement, bricks, and tile, the surface village completed its first round of expansion. The roads had been hardened, garbage and waste were processed centrally, and 4 public toilets were in operation. Lizard folk and kobolds reclaimed wide areas of unused land. With iron plows and fertilizer, the grain yield was expected to increase several-fold. The villagers had not lost their fear of me, but they had begun acknowledging the practical improvements brought by the new order. I stationed dragon-blooded goblin guards on the surface so ordinary adventurers could not destroy the outpost. After I returned underground, Mary finally bore her first offspring following a pregnancy of nearly 2 months. For chieftain tier offspring and 1 lord tier offspring, reward all attributes plus 1,000 fire element mana plus 10,001 lord tier talent scroll. Bonus reward 1 lord tier Baylor heart and 1 fragment of the law of fire. The 5 infants had demonic horns, and magma seemed to flow beneath their red skin. Apart from a few goblin traits, they resembled young Baylors. I named them Baylor goblins. A leader tier descendant normally reached intermediate combat power as an adult, a chieftain tier descendant reached advanced, and a lord tier 1 could grow into at least a top tier monster. This single birth from Mary added 5 future high-end fighters to the Caesar clan. More importantly, the system granted a lord tier scroll and a fragment of law for the first time. No amount of ordinary attributes could directly cross the legendary threshold. A law, however, might let me truly touch that level. The village expansion did not pursue a tidy appearance. It first addressed the causes of death and disease. Drains ran along the lowest points of the roads. The wells had raised cement rims, and the toilets stood far from the water supply under a schedule for regular cleaning. Grain warehouses received brick foundations and fine mesh across their vents, noticeably reducing losses to rats and damp. Lizard folk and kobolds did not gather in the streets during the day. They worked only in the outer fields and on construction at night, preventing visiting merchants from immediately learning that monsters controlled the village. Once the villagers received wages and larger rations, their initial silence gradually became voluntary enrollment. Self-interest had not created trust, but it had already made everyday cooperation possible. The temperature around Mary's cell rose for 3 days before the birth. The fire elements absorbed by the mithril chains approached their limit. So I moved her to a newly excavated heat-resistant chamber whose walls were reinforced with mithril fragments and lava stone. She still refused to call herself a member of the clan, but during labor, she demanded that the children be kept safe. After the 5 Baylor goblins were born, even the weakest 4 stood at chieftain tier. Their cries stirred nearby flames. and their bodies were hot enough to ignite ordinary cloth, forcing us to place them in stone nursery basins. The Lord-tier infant possessed a complete fire core in his chest and could soften nearby rock before reaching adulthood. I rewrote the registry's equivalence for high-tier offspring. A mature leader was roughly intermediate, a chieftain was advanced, and a lord reached at least the top rank, with individual training and bloodline purity producing variation in either direction. For the first time, the Caesar clan possessed a next generation certain to reach the top rank. The system's rewards pushed my own attributes directly beyond ordinary mortal limits. When Mary awoke, she first asked whether all 5 children were alive. I let her observe them through the mithril barrier and told her each infant's tier and condition. She did not pledge allegiance, but for the first time, she volunteered the correct way to feed Baylor young. They required high-temperature minerals, fire cores, and a caregiving environment capable of resisting burns. The cooperation did not represent a change of heart. Neither of us wanted the children to die from ignorance. I did not leave immediately. First, I strengthened the elemental isolation around Mary's chamber. Even without hostility, a Lord-tier Baylor infant might release extreme heat by instinct. Each one needed separate training while growing, or a single emotional outburst could burn an entire residential district. The Lord-tier scroll granted an ability of the succubus race. Sigil of Desire. Lord-tier talent. It could use mana to leave a permanent mark on a target, greatly magnifying physical sensation. After repeated influence by the caster, the marked person would gradually develop deeper mental dependence and obedience. The ability did not increase my combat power directly, but it could strengthen my control of dangerous prisoners. I classified it as a method of domination that required cautious use and did not expand upon the system's suggestive description. Next, I absorbed the Lord-tier Baylor heart. The magma power inside it was consumed by the dark bloodline and flowed throughout my body along the veins. It would have burned an ordinary creature to nothing. Protected by divine power and my steel dragon physique, I completed the adaptation. From that moment on, I could release flame instinctively like a true Baylor, without constructing a spell model. A casual strike approached the power of top-ranked magic. Last came the fragment of the Law of Fire. A near-legendary had merely raised physique or mana to the mortal limit. Grasping part of a law made one a false legendary, while complete comprehension of one law marked the beginning of the true legendary rank. The fragment before me was roughly 1/10 of the complete Law of Fire. I absorbed it. For the first time, my mind saw the pathways of fire elements spread throughout the world. The power of every flame-related ability doubled, and their responses became more direct. If I gathered 10 similar fragments, I might complete the Law of Fire. Then an ordinary fireball could become several or even 10 times stronger, while upper-level or forbidden magic could destroy a city. The system's description of the Sigil of Desire made me test its limits first. The mark had to be placed through contact. The stronger the target's mana, the more power it required to maintain. Mithril weakened the sense of the sigil but could not eliminate it. Because it magnified pain, fear, and dependence, it could easily cause psychological damage and was unsuitable for ordinary followers or daily administration. I used it only as an additional restraint on the most dangerous prisoners, never as a replacement for chains, rules, or interests. A marked person could still lie, conceal information, or destroy herself in despair. A system ability could improve the probability of control, but it could not turn a person with a will into a risk-free tool. As the Baylor heart fused with me, all the fire element mana inside my body ignited first. Steel dragon blood held my bones together, while dark divine power consumed the most violent demonic will. Only then did the remaining energy become a new bloodline organ. Afterward, I could form a blade of fire in my palm without the grimoire and transform part of my skin into molten stone armor. The change brought by the fragment of law was closer to understanding. Previously, casting meant gathering elements, constructing a model, and releasing the result. Now I could directly sense the path of burning through the world and make the same flames steal heat from a target faster or erupt in a more concentrated burst. I still could not defy a complete law, but this stood on an entirely higher plane than adding more mana. I tested Fireball, Blazing Nova, and Instinctive Flame separately. All approached twice their former power without a proportional increase in cost. When Peerless Slash incorporated the Law of Fire, Hell's Roar could incinerate regenerative tissue on contact. False Legendary was not an empty title from the system. For the first time, I had truly connected attributes, bloodlines, weapons, and law. After entering the False Legendary level, I did not abandon the Throne's defenses. The fragment represented only about 1/10 of the complete law of fire and could still be suppressed by a true legendary law. Soul, space, and divine magic might not be vulnerable to flame. I regarded this power as admission to the next battlefield, not proof of invincibility. The closer one came to the summit, the more likely a single mistaken judgment about an unknown ability would become impossible to repair. I had not become a true legendary, but I had crossed into the false legendary level. With dragon form, the Baylor Heart, a legendary battle axe, and part of the law of fire combined, even a legendary would no longer leave me with no choice but escape. I placed the sigil of desire on several of the most dangerous prisoners as a second layer of control beyond the mithril cells. It magnified pain and dependence. I verified its effect without preserving the source's repeated graphic abuse. Before long, the steel throne suddenly sounded an alarm. More than 10,000 hostile lights appeared along the territory's edge, while the aura of death and draconic pressure advanced together. I recalled every adult descendant and follower. After continuous expansion, the Caesar clan could field more than 3,000 troops. They were outnumbered but possessed equipment, dragon soul enhancements, and abilities from many classes. Skeletons and ghouls quickly filled the public caverns along the border, accompanied by more than 100 flesh golems and more than a dozen death knights. Behind the legion, a bone dragon hundreds of feet long spread its wings. Beneath it sat the black-robed necromancer who controlled them all. The threat left by the earlier death knight had finally become a full invasion. The enemy had clearly spent months preparing and transformed the remains of an adult dragon into an undead bone dragon approaching the legendary rank. I activated the steel throne. The dragon's soul strengthened every follower, while draconic pressure slowed the low-level undead. 3,000 monsters drove into the narrow entrance and, for a time, tore straight through the skeleton formation. The necromancer then sent the bone dragon into battle. Its death breath swept across the field, destroying great numbers of undead and followers without distinction. I transformed Hell's Roar into a long saber and left the throne. I might not have been able to kill a living adult dragon, but this bone dragon retained only false legendary power. Among the legendary orc's inherited techniques was one created specifically for slaying dragons. I leaped toward the cavern roof, then used the reaction force to dive. The blade locked onto the bone dragon's neck, and every ounce of strength converged into a straight line. Dragon Slayer. I confirmed the sigil of desire's control only in non-graphic terms. A marked prisoner suffered a powerful backlash when attempting an attack, and the farther the person traveled from the territory, the less stable the mark became. It could not replace guards. I maintained the mithril cells, rotating sentries, and information isolation. Against a powerful outsider, one additional restraint meant a little more time to stop an escape. When more than 10,000 red lights appeared, I first closed every non-essential route through the mithril mine and moved the infants, wounded, and human captives into the deepest residential district. The 3,000 combat followers were divided into heavy shield, long spear, ranged flame, and mobile units according to their equipment. The dwarves handled emergency repairs. We had no undead followers, yet living creatures had to maintain every defensive line. The skeletons were numerous, but only dozens could enter the narrow passage at once. The heavy shield units held back the bone spears. Long weapons shattered knee bones through the shield gaps, and flame burned the scattered cores. The true danger came from the flesh golems and death knights. The former could break the line through impact, while the latter used death magic to transform the wounded directly. The steel throne's dragon soul enhancement covered the entire entrance and drained energy far faster than usual. I could not remain at the rear forever. Once the bone dragon entered the fight, one breath destroyed 2 defensive lines and crushed even its own undead. The controller cared only about exhausting my followers through sheer numbers. I followed the rock wall to avoid its second breath and had the flame offspring concentrate their attacks on the wing joints. When the bone dragon raised its head to track me, the bones of its neck lay completely exposed. The legendary orc's dragon-slaying form required me to drive speed, gravity, and all my strength into a single point from above. There would be one opportunity. If I failed to sever the core, I would land directly within reach of its claws, before the undead legion reached the border. Bernice had used an unknown method to avoid our outer vision and appeared only after entering the edge of the territory. The weakness showed that even the dragon's eye could be deceived by death energy and enclosed rock. While the non-combatants withdrew, I sent dragon-blooded offspring to inspect the other two entrances so the bone dragon could not serve as a frontal diversion. Only after they found no second army did I commit the main force to the front. I had reserved a fire corridor behind the defensive line. When someone in front died, the body would be pulled into the flames at once, leaving nothing for the necromancer to transform. The procedure slowed our rotations and consumed a great deal of fuel, but kept the enemy from replacing its losses with mine. Against the undead, denying the enemy a corpse was itself a tactical objective. This one strike would decide whether the undead legion could continue. The blade passed the bone dragon, and its dying counterattack cracked my scales. The necromancer had just begun to laugh when the enormous skull slid from the neck. Without the core's control, the bone dragon crashed into the rock wall and stopped forever. I carried my saber toward the bone throne. The necromancer ordered the remaining legion to block me. I swept it aside with peerless slash. The power of the legendary weapon destroyed every undead creature along my path, preventing another resurrection. When the air tore the black robe away, I discovered the commander was a woman. Her name was Bernice. Born and raised underground, she was a descendant of necromancers rejected by every surface race and monster power. I gave her two choices: submit to the Caesar clan and keep her life, an existing undead, or continue resisting and disappear with the bone dragon. Bernice chose submission almost without hesitation. Her people revered strength and wanted only to survive amid universal rejection. Unlike captives such as Catherine and Isabel, her obedience was a voluntary choice for survival. I ordered Bernice to station the remaining undead along the border and reorganize every controllable unit. Ordinary undead required no food and suited the defense of dangerous passages, but they had to remain separated from living followers so death energy could not spread. The search for the silver dragon still produced nothing. Over several consecutive days, the followers examined nearly every open tunnel. Tinas confirmed once again that the sighting had occurred nearby and had no reason to deceive me on this matter. If we could find it neither on open ground nor in ordinary caves, the target was probably hidden behind sealed rock or using draconic magic capable of deceiving common perception. As the dragon-slaying form descended, Hell's roar cut through the death barrier, then passed through the thinnest connection between two neck bones. The recoil cracked the scales on my arm, and one claw scraped my shoulder. But the core had been separated with the skull, leaving the enormous body to crash into the wall through inertia alone. The undead legion did not collapse after losing the bone dragon. Through the bone throne, Bernice maintained control and piled low-level skeletons into a wall to delay me while she retreated. I did not chase every target. Peerless slash cut a straight path through the formation. Hell's roar destroyed the soul connections so the fallen undead could never receive another command. After Bernice submitted, the steel throne confirmed that her allegiance was genuine. I still took the bone throne's core control and made her surrender the range of her necromancy, her stored corpses, and every remote mark. A voluntary choice to survive deserved preservation, but it did not allow anyone to bring an army of 10,000 into the core territory without review. The remaining undead were reduced and classified. Skeletons patrolled the outermost perimeter. Ghouls were sealed together. Flesh golems would activate only during war. The dozen or so death knights went to passages already saturated with death energy. We built fiery isolation zones between living followers and undead camps. Any uncontrolled unit crossing them would burn immediately. The post-battle inventory showed many wounded among the army of 3,000, with far more equipment damage than expected. Killing the bone dragon did not mean we could fight again immediately. I suspended large-scale expansion and assigned the Silver Dragon search to small dragon-blooded teams. If the wounded dragon truly hid nearby, the vibrations from this war of death might force it to move. Bernice explained that she had indeed sent the earlier Death Knight to claim the supply of corpses near the mithril. Only after I destroyed it did she spend several months gathering the Legion and Bone Dragon. She knew nothing of the Silver Dragon's location and had no connection to the Imperial mission. Her account matched the preparation time and composition of her force, but I still assigned independent scouts to verify it. Voluntary submission could not become a shortcut around scrutiny. She also revealed the Bone Dragon's origin. The draconic remains had been buried underground for ages, while hundreds of souls had been combined into its death core. Its power approached legendary, but it had no true dragon soul. That flaw was why the dragon-slaying form could sever its control in one strike. The same tactic might not work against an undead dragon that retained its consciousness. I narrowed the search area and told the dragon-blooded offspring to use bloodline resonance rather than looking only for tracks and aura. Before we found the silver dragon, the surface village received a collection party from its former lord. A knight informed the headman that the lord was preparing for war with a neighboring fief and would collect the year's grain tax early. If the village could not pay, he would conscript 20 young adults. The village had barely more than 100 households. Losing 20 of its primary laborers would stop the autumn harvest and expansion, while the conscripts would likely become nothing more than expendable soldiers on the battlefield. 3 days later, 20 trained knights returned to the village entrance. Maintaining my human appearance through deep metamorphosis, I stood behind the headman and announced that the village no longer accepted its former lord's protection and would provide neither grain nor people. The knight captain drew his sword at once and attacked under the charge of rebellion. His blade snapped against my body. I raised a hand and released a pillar of fire that defeated the remaining knights, leaving only the captain to carry a message. From this day forward, this is my territory. Do not disturb us again. The captain could not see my monstrous identity. He concluded only that a fire mage of at least the advanced rank now stood behind the village. For an ordinary minor lord, that alone was a power requiring serious reconsideration. If the lord possessed enough sense, he would surrender this remote land for the time being. If he sent more troops, I would have to remove the threat proactively. The village's rapid development had already attracted attention, making complete concealment impossible. I decided to accelerate the surface defenses while having the villagers maintain an outward appearance of normal trade. Visitors should see only a growing town protected by a mysterious mage. They could not learn of the underground monster clan. Before the tax knights arrived, the headman had already packed the grain levy into sacks according to the old rules. The villagers did not want to surrender most of their harvest, but they feared punishment from the lord's army even more. I reopened the warehouse, locked away enough grain to survive the lean season, and publicly forbade anyone from submitting a private list of the 20 conscripts. The captain's order bore the lawful lord's seal, but the temporary tax increase lacked higher approval and had been imposed under the excuse of war. To the villagers, legality did not matter. 20 swords were the law. If I wanted to become the new ruler, I had to prove in the same place that the old law had lost its force. I kept my human appearance and summoned no underground army. The knights saw only an unfamiliar mage standing behind the headman, so their first instinct was to arrest me rather than call for reinforcements. The pillar of fire avoided vital points and first knocked away weapons and mounts. Only those who continued charging suffered grave injuries. I spared the captain not only to deliver a message, but to give the lord a controlled assessment. A powerful fighter protected the village, but did not yet seek an open war. After the battle, I allowed the villagers to visit the market as usual. I closed no roads and proclaimed no monster kingdom. The village's name, trading customs, and currency all remained. Only cement watchtowers and warning braziers appeared along the perimeter. The more the outside world believed the settlement had simply changed protectors, the less likely the empire and churches were to launch an immediate joint investigation. But the disguise would not last forever. The lord might hire stronger classed fighters or report the matter to a church. I had the demi-human offspring establish a registry of human identities. Every core follower entering the village would use a fixed name and history, so different caravans never heard contradictory stories. After the knights departed, some villagers feared the lord's revenge and asked to flee with their families. I did not force them to stay. I explained only that anyone leaving could not reveal the underground entrance and could take personal belongings. Most ultimately remained because the surrounding forest was more dangerous and the autumn harvest was near. This choice mattered more than their surrender while surrounded by an army. They still feared me, but had begun treating the village's new order as their actual life. Deep metamorphosis proved its value in the conflict. I could appear in public as a human and keep the true core of the Caesar clan hidden underground. After the night escaped, the Silver Dragon search team finally sent word. A faint resonance of dragon blood had appeared in a high-level monster region to the southwest, near the settlement of a tribe of sand trolls. Trolls stood about 10 feet tall and possessed intelligence, powerful regeneration, and a tradition of voodoo. In ancient times, they had established an empire that fed on humans and elves. After the elves defeated them, the remaining branches fled underground. Even in decline, an ordinary troll remained a high-level monster. A battle at the legendary level would rapidly kill ordinary followers, so I traveled alone. The troll settlement blocked the only tunnel forward. More than a dozen warriors began by throwing metal spears. I caught the first and hurled it back, killing the attacker on the spot. The remaining trolls entered a frenzy and became far stronger. Yet even their dense volley of spears could not penetrate the 3 defensive layers of dark carapace, dragon scales, and Baylor stone armor. I drove the same spear through several enemies, then finished the remaining warriors with flame. To prevent intelligent monsters from taking revenge later, I eliminated the entire hostile tribe. The narration did not expand upon the violence, but preserved the outcome from the source in full. The final troll priest sacrificed its life to cast a voodoo curse, only for the law of fire to burn the green poisonous fog away. After passing through the settlement, the steel dragon blood inside me finally sensed another of its kind. I followed the resonance to a sealed stone wall and cut open the passage with Hell's roar. Deep inside the cavern, a pair of silver vertical pupils opened. It was a true adult silver dragon. Its silver scales had lost their luster, and an astonishing long sword pierced its back. Residual power on the blade continued wearing away its life, leaving it perhaps unable to defeat even an ordinary top-ranked classed fighter. A young woman in an elegant gown lay beside the silver dragon. The noise woke her, and she screamed the moment she saw me. Based on Tina's intelligence, she was the missing princess of the Wisteria Empire. The 2 targets I had sought for so long appeared before me together: a gravely wounded adult female silver dragon and an imperial princess whose disappearance had shaken the empire. But why the silver dragon had taken her and who had left the sword in its back remained unrevealed when the original story ended at chapter 54. The dragon blood resonance had been exceedingly faint, like a heartbeat passing through layer after layer of rock. The search team confirmed only the direction and did not approach the troll territory. Through the dragon's eye, I saw that the region did not belong to the clan and could obtain no detailed image. I withdrew every follower and set out alone with Hell's roar and restorative potions. Gray-yellow keratin covered the sand troll's skin, and their wounds closed within several breaths. Ordinary cuts only enraged them, while fire destroyed the regenerative tissue. After my first counter throw pierced the lead warrior, the others entered a frenzy to the rhythm of voodoo drums. Their strength increased, and they almost ceased to feel pain. I did not become trapped in close combat with every troll. Hell's roar swept through the spear formation with law-infused flame, sealing every severed surface with heat. My dragon wings carried me over the front line to destroy the priest and totems first. Without the voodoo enhancement, the frenzied warriors remained savage but could not penetrate my 3 layers of defense. I eliminated the hostile tribe completely, so no survivor could follow the tracks and attack the village or search teams. The last curse struck my dragon scales, and green lines crawled along my arm toward my heart. Rather than rely on physique alone, I ignited every node along the fire element pathways. Without anything to cling to, the voodoo became gray mist. The result also confirmed that a false legendary law could handle curses I had once been unable to understand. There was no obvious entrance beyond the rock wall. The silver dragon had clearly sealed the cavern deliberately. I first tapped the stone with the back of my axe to find the hollow, then cut around the edges so falling rubble would not strike anyone inside. The instant the first cold wind escaped, the steel dragon blood grew hot, proving the source of the resonance stood only steps away. The long sword through the dragon's back was still draining its life, but the emblem on its hilt did not match the imperial design Horton had carried. The princess's gown showed no obvious battle damage, and she wore no chains. A gravely wounded dragon and a princess who had remained beside it raised more questions than a simple abduction could answer. But neither occupant of the cavern gave me time for an explanation. The silver vertical pupils had fixed upon my weapon, while the appearance of a stranger awakened the princess. I made no decision for events that had not yet happened. I stopped beyond attacking distance and tightened my grip on Hell's roar. The story of chapter 54 ended at the moment before the answer could be spoken. Before entering the silver dragon's cavern, I studied the positions of the princess and the longsword. The princess lay very close to the dragon's head, an exceedingly dangerous place for a simple captive. She also had drinking water and simple bedding nearby, showing that someone had cared for her. The long sword piercing the dragon's back resembled a continuing seal. Pulling it blindly might save a life or immediately release the power it restrained. Those contradictions kept me from attacking at once. The resonance from my steel dragon blood contained no hostility. It felt more like a plea for help on the verge of fading. Yet the silver dragon still held its claws in front of the princess, ready to protect her even at the edge of death. I stopped where I stood, neither approaching the sword nor ending my transformation. Only one explanation separated us. But one mistaken judgment could turn the first answer into another battle. I did not decide the answer before the story could give it. I only tightened my grip on my weapon and walked into the cavern.